You arrive at Traitor's Gate on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, when the Thames runs grey and sluggish beneath a mist that seems to remember every sin ever committed along its banks. The barge that carries you moves with painful slowness, each stroke of the oars a heartbeat closer to the mouth of stone that waits to devour you. This is not how you imagined your journey would end, not with banners and trumpets announcing your arrival to court, but with the soft splash of water against weathered stone and the creak of ancient hinges as the gate opens to receive another soul marked for judgment. The year is 1536, though such specific measures of time will soon cease to matter to you. The Tower of London has stood for nearly 5 centuries already, patient as death, indifferent to the parade of flesh that passes through its chambers. Kings have come and gone, queens have smiled and wept, traitors have whispered final prayers within these walls. The tower remembers them all, but speaks of none. Your hands are bound before you, not with rough rope that might befit a common criminal, but with silk cords, a small courtesy for one of your station. The guards do not meet your eyes. They have learned that it is easier this way to transport the living dead without acknowledging the humanity that still flickers behind fearful eyes. Their faces are impassive masks, carved from the same emotional stone as the tower itself. The barge settles against the worn steps of Traitor's Gate with a gentle bump. Water laps at the stone, a constant whisper that reminds you of confessionals, of secrets told in hushed tones, of promises that will now go unfulfilled. You are not the first to hear this sound, nor will you be the last. The steps are worn smooth from the passage of countless feet, some walking toward imprisonment, others toward freedom, but most toward an appointment with the scaffold. Step carefully, my lord, says the guard to your right, not out of kindness, but from duty. A fall here would be undignified, and the tower demands dignity even in despair. His hand on your elbow is firm but not cruel. He has done this before, perhaps dozens of times, perhaps hundreds. Your boots make a hollow sound against the stone steps as you ascend from the water. Each footfall echoes beneath the low arch of Traitor's Gate, the sound traveling upward into the belly of the tower, like a messenger announcing your arrival to unseen listeners. The air grows colder as you pass beneath the threshold, though you cannot tell if this is the natural chill of stone or the cold breath of history washing over your skin. Chains rattle somewhere ahead, the sound amplified by the curved ceiling above. It might be another prisoner being moved from one cell to another, or simply the mechanism of a door being secured. In the tower, the sounds of confinement become a kind of language all their own, a grim vocabulary of ironwork and keys turning in ancient locks. The corridor beyond Traitor's Gate narrows like a throat, and you must duck your head slightly to avoid the low ceiling. Water drips somewhere, a steady plink-plink that will become the metronome of your days here. Guards' boots scrape against the stone floor, and their breathing, steady, untroubled, contrasts with your own shallow gasps. You try to remember the last time you drew a full breath. Was it in the Privy Council chamber when the accusations were first read, or perhaps earlier that morning, when you dressed in your finest doublet, unaware that it would soon be inventoried among your possessions? The lieutenant awaits, says the guard on your left, and you wonder if he says these exact words to everyone who passes this way, a line in a play that has run for centuries. The lieutenant of the tower is a man of middle years, with a face that has witnessed too much history to be impressed by any single tragedy. He stands at the end of the corridor, hands clasped before him, his keys of office hanging from his belt like strange fruit. When he looks at you, it is not with malice, but with the practiced assessment of one who must transform a person into a prisoner, a name into a number, a life into an entry in a ledger. You are expected, he says, and the formality of the greeting strikes you as absurd. Of course you were expected. The tower always expects its next guest. It waits, patient as the stone from which it is carved. He takes your name, your title, your possessions, each item carefully recorded by a scribe whose quill scratches against parchment with a sound like distant rats. Your rings, removed one by one, your purse, weighed and set aside, your knife, examined and placed in a wooden box. With each item, you become less yourself and more the tower's creature. You will be housed in the bell tower, the lieutenant informs you, and there is something in his tone, not quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition. The bell tower has held others of your rank before. Some returned to the world, many did not. The walk to your lodgings takes you through a series of courtyards and passages, each turn revealing a new angle of imprisonment. Ravens watch from the walls, their glossy feathers catching what little light filters through the cloud-choked sky. An old legend claims that, if the ravens ever leave the tower, the kingdom will fall. You wonder, in a moment of bitter fancy, if the same might be said of the executioner's axe, that if it ever rests too long, some essential part of England would crumble. Guards nod to other guards as you pass. A servant hurries by with an armful of linens. A priest walks slowly in the opposite direction, prayer book in hand, his eyes downcast. This is what strikes you most, not the grim stone walls or the iron-studded doors, but the ordinary rhythms of life that continue within this place of endings. People eat and sleep and pray and work, all in the shadow of the scaffold. The bell tower reveals itself, a circular structure rising from the northeastern corner of the inner ward. Its windows are narrow slits, permitting only the thinnest blades of daylight to enter. The door is thick oak, reinforced with iron bands that have turned the color of dried blood with age. 3 flights up, says the lieutenant, and for the first time you detect something like weariness in his voice. How many condemned lords and ladies has he escorted up these same winding stairs? How many final conversations has he endured? The staircase coils upward like a serpent, each stone step worn into a shallow bowl by centuries of fearful feet. Your silk-bound hands make the ascent awkward, and twice you stumble, causing the guards to tighten their grip on your arms. The stairwell is dark, illuminated only by torches set in iron brackets at irregular intervals. Their flames cast long, distorted shadows that seem to climb the walls alongside you, mocking your progress. At the top of the stairs, another heavy door awaits. The key that opens it is nearly the length of a man's hand, and it turns in the lock with a sound like distant thunder. The room beyond will be your world now. A circular chamber, perhaps 15 feet across, with walls 6 feet thick. A bed with a straw mattress occupies one corner. A table and chair stand near the room's single window. A chamber pot waits discreetly behind a wooden screen. A small fireplace offers the promise of warmth, though you will soon learn that the damp of the Thames finds its way through stone. No matter how hot the flames, you will be provided with writing materials, the lieutenant says, should you wish to correspond with His Majesty or the Council. All letters will be read before they leave these walls. You nod, unable to form words just yet. The reality of your situation is still washing over you in cold waves. Meals will be brought 3 times daily. You may request books from the tower's collection, within reason. A priest will visit if you desire spiritual comfort. These small mercies are granted not out of kindness, but precedent. The tower has protocols for everything, including the slow grinding down of hope. Your servant may attend you during daylight hours only. He will sleep elsewhere. 'Tis is how it begins, the careful separation from all that anchors you to the world beyond these walls. First your possessions, then your dignity, then your connections to others. By the time they take your life, if they take your life, you will already be half a ghost. The guards remove the silk cords from your wrists, and you resist the urge to rub the skin where they have left faint red lines. Such a display of discomfort would be beneath your station. Instead, you stand very still as the lieutenant makes his final assessment. Is there anything you require immediately? He asks, a formality as empty as the promises that brought you here. You shake your head. What could you possibly ask for? Freedom is not on the list of available comforts. Then I shall leave you to settle in, he says, and with a slight bow, habit rather than deference, he backs from the room. The guards follow, and the heavy door swings shut with a finality that seems to push all the air from your lungs. The key turns in the lock, and you are alone, or not quite alone. The tower itself is always present, watching with eyes of stone, listening with ears of mortar and brick. It has absorbed the sighs and screams of prisoners for centuries, and now it waits to collect yours. You move to the window, a narrow aperture that widens on the inside to form a deep embrasure. Standing in this stone throat, you can see a slice of the outer ward, where life continues with brutal normality. Guards patrol, servants hurry about their tasks, and beyond the curtain wall, London sprawls in smoky indifference to your fate. Somewhere in that city, the king sits in council, perhaps at this very moment, discussing what is to be done with you. Perhaps your name has already been forgotten, replaced by the next crisis, the next betrayal, the next whispered conspiracy. Or perhaps you are being discussed in detail, your crimes enumerated, your punishment debated, your family's reaction anticipated. The uncertainty is its own form of torture, one the tower administers with practiced skill. The walls do not need to close in, they simply need to stand implacable and patient, while your mind does the work of crushing itself. Evening approaches, marked by the changing quality of light through your narrow window. The first of many sunsets you will witness through this slitted eye in the tower's face. The sky burns briefly orange, then fades to purple, then to the deep blue-black of a bruise. Torches are lit in the courtyard below, their flames dancing like malevolent spirits. The key rattles in your door, and you turn from the window to see a guard enter, followed by a servant bearing a tray. The simple meal, bread, cheese, cold meat, and small beer, is placed on your table without ceremony. The servant avoids your gaze, but you notice his hands trembling slightly. Is it fear of you, a supposed traitor, or simply the natural anxiety of one who must enter and exit the tower daily, never knowing if one day he might enter as a prisoner instead? Will there be anything else, sir? The guard asks, his voice neither kind nor cruel, merely efficient. You shake your head, and they leave you to your meal and your thoughts. The door locks again. The sound will soon become as familiar as your own heartbeat. You eat little, though you know you should maintain your strength. The bread is fresh enough, the cheese sharp, the meat properly salted. The tower may break your spirit, but it will not starve your body, at least not while you remain a prisoner of rank. Lesser inmates, housed in the dungeons beneath your feet, might not fare so well. Night deepens outside your window. The noises of the tower change with the darkness. Fewer footsteps, more distant clanks of metal, occasional calls between sentries. From somewhere far below comes the sound of singing. A drunken guardsman, perhaps, or maybe another prisoner finding solace in melody. The sound rises through the stone like a ghost seeking escape. Sleep will not come easily on this first night. The straw mattress crackles beneath you, unfamiliar and unyielding. The blankets are wool, adequate but rough against skin, accustomed to finer fabrics. The pillow smells faintly of its previous occupant, lavender and fear, an unsettling combination. In the darkness, your mind replays the events that brought you here. The whispered conversation in a corridor at Whitehall, the letter intercepted, the look on the king's face when your name was mentioned in connection with what exactly. Even now, you're not entirely sure which of your many indiscretions has finally caught up with you. In Tudor England, innocence is rarely as important as appearance, and you have appeared too close to matters that should have remained distant. The bell tower lives up to its name sometime after midnight, when the great clock strikes the hour. The sound reverberates through your body, a reminder that time continues its march, even for those whose futures have become uncertain. Each toll might be counting down to your release, or to your execution. You rise from your bed, unable to lie still any longer, and return to the window. The courtyard below is quiet now, lit only by the occasional torch and a thin slice of moon that has managed to push through the clouds. In the distance, the Thames continues its patient journey, carrying secrets and sewage with equal indifference toward the sea. Breathe, you whisper to yourself, and the sound of your own voice startles you. It seems smaller here, confined by the thick walls, diminished, like your prospects. You breathe as instructed, drawing the damp tower air deep into your lungs. It tastes of smoke and stone dust, of moss and ancient mortar, of fear both fresh and centuries old. This is the air that Anne Boleyn breathed before her neck met the swordsman's blade. This is the air that filled the lungs of princes before they vanished into the silent pages of history. Tomorrow will bring another day of waiting, of listening for footsteps that might carry news of your fate. Perhaps the lieutenant will visit, his face giving away nothing. Perhaps a message will arrive from the king, either mercy or condemnation sealed with wax and ribbon. Perhaps nothing will happen at all, and that you are beginning to understand is its own form of torment. For now there is only this circular room, this narrow window, this breath that fogs slightly in the night air. There is only the tower, holding you in its stone embrace, adding your fear to its collection of human experiences. You return to your bed and lie down again, pulling the rough blankets up to your chin. Above you, the ceiling vanishes into darkness. Beside you, the wall holds centuries of whispered prayers and curses from those who came before. Beneath you, the tower continues its silent vigil, neither malevolent nor benevolent, merely present and eternal. Sleep, when it finally comes, is thin and troubled. Your dreams are of open fields and unlimited horizons, making the awakening to your circular prison all the more cruel. But awaken you do, to the sound of a key in the lock, and the realization that this is only the first morning of what might be many, or what might be your last. The grey light of dawn seeps through your window, bringing with it the sounds of the tower stirring to life. Guards calling to one another as shifts change, ravens croaking their harsh greetings to the new day. The distant clatter of the kitchen preparing breakfast for prisoners and keepers alike. Your door opens to admit the same servant as the previous evening, now bearing a basin of water and a towel. He sets these on the table without meeting your eye, then leaves, promising to return shortly with food. The door locks behind him. You wash your face and hands in water that is surprisingly clean and cool. This small civility, a chance to remove the grime of fear from your skin, feels momentarily like grace. But as you pat your face dry with the rough towel, You catch sight of your reflection in the polished metal plate on the wall. Your eyes are shadowed, your face already showing the strain of confinement. Has it been only one night? It feels like a lifetime since you pass beneath Traitor's Gate. Breakfast arrives as promised. Porridge steaming in a wooden bowl, bread still warm from the ovens, a small pot of honey, and watered wine. Again, you note the quality of the provisions. The tower does not mistreat those of rank, not in these small ways, at least. The greater cruelty lies in the waiting, in the not knowing, in the slow dissolution of hope that comes with each passing hour. As you eat, you become aware of increased activity in the courtyard below. Peering through your window, you see workmen erecting a wooden platform near the center of the tower green. Even from this distance, you recognize the shape and purpose of the structure taking form, a scaffold, the platform of death. Your spoon pauses halfway to your mouth. The porridge suddenly tastes of ashes. This is why they call it Execution Week. This is why the air in the tower feels charged with dread and anticipation. Someone is scheduled to die, perhaps several someones, and the preparations have begun. You force yourself to finish eating, knowing that strength will be needed regardless of what the coming days might bring. The body's needs continue even when the future becomes uncertain. This, too, is a lesson the tower teaches to all who enter its gates. After breakfast, your servant returns with fresh linens, a small luxury that reminds you of your status. He helps you dress in clothes that were sent from your home, familiar garments that now feel like artifacts from another life. As he adjusts your collar, you finally speak to him. "Who is it for?" you ask, nodding toward the window and the scaffold beyond. The servant hesitates, his hand stilling at your throat. "I couldn't say for certain, my lord," but his eyes tell a different story. He knows, or at least suspects. The tower is a small community, and rumors travel quickly through its corridors. "Please," you say, lowering your voice, though there is no one else to hear. "I must know what's happening." He glances at the door, then leans slightly closer. "They say Lord Rochford will go tomorrow, and after him, the others." Rochford, the name strikes you like a physical blow. You know him. Not well, perhaps, but well enough to have dined at the same table, to have exchanged pleasantries at court, well enough to understand that if he has been condemned, your own situation may be more precarious than you had hoped. "What is the charge?" you ask, though in your heart you already know. "Me treason," the servant whispers, and steps back as though the word itself might contaminate him, "and other matters too base to speak aloud." The familiar pattern, accusations of treason, intertwined with sexual slander, a combination that makes defense nearly impossible. Once a man's moral character is questioned, his political loyalty becomes suspect as well. The Tudor method of destruction is thorough. "Thank you," you say, and mean it. Information is currency in the tower, and he has just made you richer at risk to himself. He nods once, finishes his duties, and leaves you alone again. The key turns in the lock. You move to the window, drawn by a morbid need to witness the continuing preparations. The scaffold is taking shape rapidly, its wooden bones rising like a strange creature being born on the green. Workers hammer and call to one another, their voices carrying clearly in the tower's enclosed space. They joke as they work, these men who build the stage for death. It is simply a job to them, a task no different from constructing a market stall or repairing a fence. Beyond them, you can see other prisoners being exercised in the yard under guard, men of lesser rank than yourself, allowed this small freedom of movement that your status ironically denies you. They walk in circles, their faces turned toward what pale sunlight manages to penetrate the tower's walls. Like plants starved for light, they stretch toward any suggestion of the world beyond stone. A movement closer to your tower catches your eye. A woman stands at a window in the Queen's lodgings, her figure partially obscured by the leaded glass. Even at this distance, you can see that she holds herself with dignity, her back straight, her head unbowed. Is she another prisoner awaiting judgment, or perhaps a lady attending someone of even higher rank confined within? She seems to look in your direction, and for a moment, you imagine your eyes meet across the courtyard, two souls suspended in the tower's grasp, separated by stone and circumstance, but united in uncertainty. Then she withdraws from the window, and you are left with only questions that have no answers. The day stretches before you, empty of purpose, but full of dread. This is the true punishment of the tower, not the physical discomfort, or even the final meeting with the axe, but the endless hours with nothing but your own thoughts for company. Hours in which fear can grow, like mold, in the damp corners of your mind. You try to impose structure on the formless time. You pace the circumference of your room, 7 steps to complete the circle. You recite poetry you memorized in your youth. The familiar cadences, a comfort in this unfamiliar place. You examine the carvings left by previous occupants on the stone walls, names, dates, prayers, symbols of faith or despair. Near the window, someone has scratched a small ship with billowing sails, a dream of escape, perhaps, or simply a memory of freedom. In another spot, elaborate Latin phrases speak of patience and God's mercy. On a stone near the door, a simple cross has been carved so deeply that your finger can trace its shape without seeing it. You wonder if you will leave your own mark on these walls, and if you do, what would you choose to commemorate your time here? What message would you leave for the next occupant of this circular prison? These thoughts occupy you until the midday meal arrives, a soup rich with vegetables and barley, more bread, a small portion of fish. Again you note the quality of the food, so at odds with the grim purpose of this place. You eat mechanically, without pleasure, but with the disciplined understanding that the body must be maintained. After the meal, an unexpected visitor arrives. The lieutenant himself unlocks your door and enters, followed by a clerk carrying writing materials. His Majesty's Council has sent instructions, the lieutenant says, his tone revealing nothing of their nature. You are to provide a full account of your movements and associations over the past 2 months. So it begins, the careful construction of evidence, the sifting of your life for moments of weakness or indiscretion that can be reframed as treason. You know how this works. You have seen it happen to others. The account you provide now may well become the foundation of your indictment or your exoneration. I am at His Majesty's service, you say, the formal words feeling like pebbles in your mouth. The clerk sets up his materials on the table, parchment, quills, ink, sand, to blot the wet letters. He will record your words, every hesitation, every qualification noted and potentially used against you. Begin with the first day of August, the lieutenant instructs, and proceed chronologically. Be thorough. Omissions will be viewed unfavorably. You nod, take a breath, and begin to reconstruct your recent past, knowing that each word carries the weight of your future. Every dinner you attended, every conversation held in shadowed galleries, every letter written or received, all must be recorded and confessed. The clerk's quill scratches across the parchment, a sound like insects burrowing into wood. Hours pass in this manner. Your throat grows dry from speaking. The light through your window shifts, marking the sun's passage toward evening. Still, the questions continue. Who visited your home? Who did you meet at court? What was discussed? Did anyone speak ill of the king or his policies? What letters passed through your hands? Finally, when the light has faded so much that the clerk must squint to see his own writing, the lieutenant raises a hand to pause the proceedings. We shall continue tomorrow, he says. Consider carefully what you have yet to share. Full cooperation is your best path to mercy. They leave you then, taking the written pages, but leaving the remaining blank parchment and writing tools. A message, perhaps, that you might wish to make additional notes during the night to ensure your full cooperation when questioning resumes, or perhaps a darker suggestion that you might wish to write final letters to family and friends. Should the questioning take an unfavorable turn, you stand at the window long after they've gone, watching as torches are lit around the completed scaffold. In the flickering light, the wooden platform looks almost beautiful, its purpose momentarily disguised by shadow and flame. Workers have hung black cloth around its edges, a final courtesy to hide the bloody business that will take place there from the most delicate observers. Night falls fully over the tower, bringing with it a silence that seems too complete, too heavy. The weight of stone and history presses down, making each breath an effort. Through your window comes the distant sound of a woman weeping, a sound so faint you might have imagined it, yet so piercing it seems to cut straight through the darkness to find your heart. Someone else is awake in the tower tonight, counting the hours until dawn brings either deliverance or judgment. Someone else understands exactly what it means to stand at a window and wonder if there will be many more sunsets to witness, or if the darkness that eventually comes will be permanent. You turn from the window and face your circular room, now shrouded in shadow except for the pool of light cast by the single candle left for you. The flame dances with your movement, sending your own shadow leaping grotesquely up the curved wall. This is Traitor's Gate from the inside, not just the physical entrance through which you arrived, but the spiritual passage into a world where hope dissolves and certainty crumbles. A gate that once passed through changes you irrevocably, whether you eventually leave the tower alive or not. You sit at the table and pull a blank sheet of parchment toward you. The quill feels awkward in your hand, though you have written countless letters before. Tonight words seem inadequate, slippery things that might betray rather than communicate. Still, you begin to write. Not the additional confessions the lieutenant might hope for, nor the final farewells that part of you fears may be necessary. Instead, you write a simple account of this first day in the tower, the sights, the sounds, the small details that have already begun to carve themselves into your memory. Perhaps, if you survive this place, these notes will help you remember exactly what it meant to have freedom taken away. And if you do not survive, perhaps someone will find these pages and understand a little of what it meant to be swallowed by the tower's stone throat, to feel hope dissolving with each key turn in the lock, to hear the hammers building death's platform outside your window. You write until the candle burns low, recording these hours that may be among your last. When your eyes grow too heavy to continue, you seal the pages and hide them beneath your mattress, a small act of defiance against a place that would strip you of all privacy. Sleep comes more easily than you expected, your body surrendering to exhaustion even as your mind continues to race. Your dreams are of water rising slowly inside your circular room, of hammers striking wood that screams with human voices, of keys turning in locks that open not doors but veins. You wake to the sound of bells, not just the tower's own clock, but the churches of London beyond the walls calling the faithful to prayer. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, you reach for the familiar contours of your own bedchamber, Then your hand meets cold stone, and remembrance floods back with cruel clarity. This is your second day in the Tower of London. Outside, the scaffold waits. Somewhere in these same walls, Lord Rochford wakes to the knowledge that the bells are counting down the remaining hours of his life. And you wake to uncertainty, to questions without answers, to the slow corrosion of hope that is the tower's most effective weapon. The key turns in your lock. Another day begins. Breakfast arrives with the same quiet efficiency as the day before. The servant who brings your meal seems more nervous today, his hands shaking visibly as he arranges the food on your table. When you thank him, he startles like a deer hearing a twig snap in the forest. Is something amiss? You ask, though you already suspect the answer. He glances toward the window, where the scaffold stands ready in the grey morning light. They've moved Lord Rochford to the bell tower's lower chamber, he whispers, for his final hours. The knowledge that another condemned man breathes the same tower air, perhaps only one floor below your feet, sends a chill through your body that has nothing to do with the morning's damp cold. The distance between his fate and your own situation suddenly seems perilously small. Will it be today then? You ask. The servant nods once, sharply. At noon, 4 hours, perhaps 5. That is what remains of George Boleyn, Lord Rochford's life. A man who once stood high in the king's favour, brother to a queen, master of his own grand estates, now reduced to counting final heartbeats in a room much like your own. Thank you, you say again, and the servant hurries away, as though your gratitude might somehow contaminate him. Left alone, you find your appetite has vanished. The bread remains untouched, the porridge cools, forgotten. Instead, you move to the window, drawn by a morbid fascination with the preparations now visible in the courtyard below. Guards take up positions around the scaffold. A priest walks slowly across the green, prayer book in hand, his face tilted slightly upward, as though already seeking God's attention. Workers make final adjustments to the wooden steps that lead to the platform, ensuring they are secure. One man tests the sturdiness of the railing, leaning his weight against it, making certain it will support a condemned man's final grasp. You watch all this with a detached fascination, aware that you are observing rituals that have been performed countless times before and will be performed countless times again. The tower has perfected the choreography of death over centuries, each participant knowing exactly their role in the grim ballet. A movement from another window catches your attention. In the Queen's lodgings, the same female figure you noticed yesterday stands watching the preparations. Even at this distance, you can see that her posture has changed, shoulders now slightly curved forward, head bowed. Does she know Lord Rochford? Is she connected to his fate in some way? Before you can ponder this further, your door unlocks again. The lieutenant enters, followed by the same clerk as yesterday, both wearing expressions as unreadable as the stone walls. We will continue now, the lieutenant says, without preamble. Your account from September the 15th onward, if you please. The questioning resumes where it left off, a methodical dissection of your recent past. Each meeting scrutinized, each letter examined, each casual remark now viewed through the distorting lens of suspected treason. The clerk's quill scratches endlessly, recording your words for others to sift through, looking for the fatal inconsistency or admission. But today, your concentration constantly drifts to the window, to the knowledge of what will occur at noon. The lieutenant notices your distraction. Lord Rochford's business need not concern you, he says, misinterpreting your preoccupation as mere morbid curiosity. Focus on providing complete answers to our questions. Of course, you reply, forcing your attention back to the inquiry at hand. But his words have confirmed what you already knew. Today is execution day for George Boleyn, and the tower expects you to continue your regular routine while death visits your neighbor. The minutes crawl by, marked by the scratching quill and your own increasingly hoarse voice. When the church bells begin to toll the noon hour, the lieutenant pauses the questioning. No explanation is offered, but none is needed. All three of you in the room know what the bells signify. A strange quiet falls over the tower. The normal sounds of daily life, guards calling to one another, servants moving about their duties, the ravens croaking from the walls, all seem to hush, as though the very stones are holding their breath. You rise from your chair and move to the window, unable to resist witnessing what occurs below. The lieutenant makes no move to stop you. Perhaps he understands this need to see, to know, to confront the reality that might one day be your own. The courtyard has filled with observers, officials in dark robes, guards standing at attention, a few privileged witnesses, permitted to view what is officially a private execution. At each corner of the scaffold stands a tower guardsman, face impassive, pike held vertically at his side. A small procession emerges from the White Tower. At its center walks Lord Rochford, dressed in what must be his finest clothes, his step measured and dignified. Beside him walks the priest, lips moving in what you assume are prayers for the condemned man's soul. Behind them, at a respectful distance, comes the executioner, not hooded, as common belief might suggest, but bareheaded, dressed simply in dark clothing, carrying his sword wrapped in cloth. Even from your high window, you can see that Rochford holds himself with remarkable composure. His back is straight, his pace neither hurried nor reluctant. He has had days to prepare for this moment, to rehearse in his mind how he will meet death when it comes. Now it seems he is determined to die well, the final dignity available to him. The lieutenant moves to stand beside you at the window. He will be permitted to speak, he says quietly, as befits his rank. You nod, unable to form words. The distance between your window and the scaffold suddenly seems both vast and non-existent, a space you could cross in an instant, or an unbridgeable chasm. Below, Rochford climbs the steps to the scaffold. At the top, he turns to face the assembled witnesses. From this height, you cannot hear his words, but you can see him speaking, his hands occasionally rising in gesture to emphasize a point. The final performance of a courtier skilled in rhetoric, now delivering the most important speech of his life, and the last. After several minutes, he kneels. The priest stands before him, making the sign of the cross. Rochford bends forward, placing his neck on the low block positioned at the center of the platform. His final words appear to be directed to the executioner himself, perhaps the traditional request for a swift, clean stroke, perhaps forgiveness for the man who must take his life. The executioner removes the cloth from his sword. The blade catches the weak sunlight, a flash of terrible brightness in the grey day. He measures his distance carefully, raises the weapon, and you look away at the last moment. But you hear the collective gasp from the courtyard below, followed by a silence so complete it seems to fill the tower from foundation to battlements. When you force yourself to look again, the platform is stained dark, and attendants are already moving forward with a waiting coffin. Lord Rochford has left the tower in the only way now available to him. Beside you, the lieutenant steps back from the window. "We will resume in 1 hour," he says, his voice neutral, as though nothing unusual has interrupted the day's routine. "I suggest you take some refreshment." He and the clerk leave, locking the door behind them. You remain at the window, watching as the scaffold is cleaned as the body is placed in its simple coffin, as the witnesses gradually disperse, returning to their duties or their own confinement. In the Queen's lodgings, the female figure has disappeared from her window. You wonder if she witnessed the execution, if she knew the man who just died, if she weeps for him now in the privacy of her chamber. You wonder too, if someone will one day stand at a window watching your own final moments on that same wooden platform. An hour passes in contemplation, too deep for words. When the lieutenant returns, you resume your account mechanically, your voice sounding distant even to your own ears. The execution has changed something in the air of the tower, made the threat more immediate, the walls more confining, the future more uncertain. The questioning continues until the light begins to fade. Throughout the afternoon, you are aware of movement in the courtyard below, the scaffold being dismantled, the dark stains scrubbed away, all evidence of death's visit neatly removed. By evening, only the worn patch of grass where the platform stood suggests that anything unusual occurred there today. We will continue tomorrow, the lieutenant says finally, gathering the pages of your testimony. Consider carefully if there are any details you have omitted. Full disclosure may yet win you the king's mercy. After he leaves, your evening meal arrives. A stew of beef and vegetables, bread still warm from the ovens, a cup of watered wine. The servant who brings it seems less frightened than this morning, as though the completion of the day's execution has released some of the tension from the tower. Is it true that Lord Rochford spoke well? You ask as he sets down your food. The servant hesitates, then nods. Very well, my lord. He maintained his innocence to the last, and forgave his enemies. They say he quoted scripture most eloquently. And did he? Did it happen cleanly? The question feels ghoulish on your tongue, but you need to know. One stroke, the servant confirms. The swordsman was skilled. His lordship would have felt little pain. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. In the theatre of execution, a swift death is the final kindness offered to those of rank. Thank you, you say, and mean it. These small details matter, though you couldn't have explained why even to yourself, left alone with your meal, you eat without tasting the food, your mind still replaying the scene from the courtyard, Lord Rochford's dignified walk, the flash of the sword, the silence that followed. Later, as darkness falls completely over the tower, you hear movement in the room below yours, servants clearing away Rochford's belongings, preparing the chamber for its next occupant. The sounds are oddly domestic, furniture being moved, linen stripped, floors swept, all erasing the evidence that a man lived his final days in that space. This, too, is part of the tower's routine. Death visits, then life continues. The machinery of confinement barely pauses before resuming its regular rhythm. You lie on your bed, staring up into darkness, and wonder who will occupy Rochford's room next. Another nobleman fallen from favor, a diplomat from a hostile nation, a priest who refuses to acknowledge the king's religious authority. The tower welcomes them all, its stone arms embracing every variety of alleged treason. Sleep eludes you for hours. When it finally comes, your dreams are of scaffolds that grow taller with each step you climb, of swords that transform into serpents mid-stroke, of coffins too small for human bodies, yet somehow large enough to contain entire lives. You wake to a sound you cannot immediately identify, a low rumble that seems to travel through the stone itself. Dawn has barely touched the sky outside your window, the light gray and tentative. The rumble comes again, and this time you recognize it. Drums, beating a slow, measured cadence somewhere within the tower complex. Another execution day has begun. Rising quickly, you move to the window. The courtyard below remains empty, no scaffold visible, but the drumbeat continues, coming from the direction of Tower Hill, beyond the outer walls. A public execution then, someone of lesser rank, or someone whose crime demands the witness of the common people. Your door unlocks, and the servant enters with your morning meal and fresh water for washing. His expression is grim. "Who is it today?" you ask, nodding toward the direction of the drums. "The other four," he says simply. "The Queen's supposed lovers. They go together on Tower Hill. 4 men, their lives ending in the same hour, all connected to the same alleged conspiracy that claimed Lord Rochford yesterday." The scale of the purge becomes suddenly, horrifyingly clear. This is more than the removal of a few disgraced courtiers. This is the systematic destruction of an entire faction. "And the Queen?" you ask, though you already suspect the answer. The servant looks down. "Her time comes in 2 days. They have brought a swordsman from Calais specially for her. The special executioner, a final terrible courtesy extended to a woman who once wore England's crown. Death with a sharper, swifter edge, but death nonetheless." You think of the female figure you've glimpsed at the window of the Queen's lodgings. Could it be Anne Boleyn herself? Do you share the same air, the same confinement, the same dwindling hours with the Queen awaiting execution? The thought makes your own situation seem suddenly more precarious. If the King can send his anointed Queen to the scaffold, what chance does any courtier have of clemency? After breakfast, the lieutenant arrives for another day of questioning. Today, his manner seems slightly less severe, his questions more focused on specific events rather than the broad accounting of your movements. "You were present at Greenwich on May 2nd, he says, consulting notes from previous sessions. "Did you speak with Mark Smeaton on that occasion?" Smeaton, one of the men being executed on Tower Hill at this very moment. The question creates an immediate connection between you and the condemned, an association that makes your heart beat faster with apprehension. Only briefly, you answer carefully. "He performed for the gathering. I complimented his playing, as did many others." "And did he speak of the Queen?" The trap yawns before you, obvious yet unavoidable. If you deny any discussion of the Queen, you might be contradicted by Smeaton's own confession, extracted perhaps under torture. If you admit to conversations about Anne Boleyn, you risk being drawn into the conspiracy that has already claimed so many lives. He expressed gratitude for Her Majesty's patronage of music at court, you say, choosing your words with painful precision. "Nothing more that I recall." The lieutenant makes a note, his expression revealing nothing. The questioning continues in this vein for hours, specific inquiries about your interactions with each of the men now dead or dying, careful examination of your proximity to the Queen, detailed exploration of any letters or messages you might have carried. Throughout, the distant drumbeat continues, marking the public spectacle unfolding on Tower Hill. You try to imagine it. The 4 men led to the scaffold before a crowd of Londoners, each rising to speak his final words, each kneeling to meet the axe. Do they go with dignity, like Rochford? Do they maintain their innocence, or confess to crimes they may never have committed? By midday, the drums have fallen silent. The lieutenant pauses in his questioning, making a small annotation in his notes. "It is finished, then," you say, not quite a question. He glances up. "Justice has been served," he replies, the formal phrase sitting awkwardly between you like an unwelcome guest. The afternoon proceeds with more questioning, but the intensity has diminished somewhat. Either the lieutenant has obtained the information he sought, or the day's executions have satisfied some portion of the king's wrath. By evening, he seems almost perfunctory in his inquiries. "We will likely conclude tomorrow," he says, as he gathers his papers, "unless new information comes to light." This statement, which might seem encouraging, sends a new ripple of anxiety through you. Concluding the questioning could mean many things: preparation for release, or preparation for trial, or simply that they have collected sufficient evidence for a predetermined outcome. After he leaves, you pace your circular room, 7 steps to complete the circuit, round and round, like the thoughts spinning in your mind. 5 men dead in 2 days, a queen awaiting the sword, and you caught in some ill-defined penumbra of suspicion, neither fully accused nor fully exonerated. The evening meal arrives, and with it, an unexpected presence, your own servant, permitted to attend you for the first time since your arrival. "My lord," he says, bowing deeply. His familiar face is a shock after days of tower servants' careful neutrality. "James," you reply, your voice catching. "How came you here?" "My petition daily," he says simply. "Today they granted permission. I may stay until curfew bells. This small mercy, the presence of a loyal face amid strangers, nearly undoes you." You turn away briefly, gathering your composure. "What news from outside?" you ask, when you can trust your voice again. James busies himself with arranging your meal, speaking quietly as he works. The city buzzes with the day's executions. All 5 confessed on the scaffold, affirming the Queen's guilt. You think of Rochford's dignified insistence on his innocence that the tower servant described. "So it is reported," James says, carefully. "Though some who witnessed Lord Rochford's end say his confession was artfully phrased. He admitted being worthy of death for his sins, but named no specific offense. The courtier's final performance, words that could be interpreted as confession while maintaining technical innocence. But it matters little now. In the public mind, and more importantly, in the official record, all 5 men died confirming the narrative that justified their execution. And beyond the tower, what of my family? Your wife remains at Penshurst, praying daily for your release. Your brother has petitioned the king twice for an audience, but has not yet been received." You nod, unsurprised. The king would not welcome intercessions, while the executioner's work remains unfinished, and my holdings. James hesitates. "There has been some inventory taken. Royal commissioners visited your London house 3 days past. The preparation for attainder, the legal process by which a condemned traitor's possessions revert to the crown. The machinery of confiscation has begun, even before any formal charges have been brought against you." "I see," you say quietly. You eat together in the fading light, James sharing what other news he can, which courtiers have distanced themselves from your name, which few have dared express hope for your restoration to favor. The world beyond the tower continues its relentless forward motion, already adjusting to the absence of those removed from the board of Tudor politics, already calculating new alignments of power and patronage. When the curfew bell rings, James must leave. He promises to return if permitted, to bring fresh clothing, to carry any messages you wish sent to your family. These simple offers, the continuation of his ordinary duties in this extraordinary circumstance, touch you more deeply than any grand declaration of loyalty might have done. After he is gone, your room feels emptier than before, the silence more complete. You stand at the window long after darkness has fallen, looking out at the few lights that burn in other tower buildings. Somewhere among them, a former queen spends her penultimate night on earth. You wonder if she stands at her window too, counting lights, seeking some human connection across the darkness. You wonder if she knows that 5 men have already died for the alleged crime of loving her too well. You wonder if she has made her peace with joining them. Sleep comes reluctantly, in shallow waves that break against shores of anxiety. Your dreams are fragmented, a sword-sharp edge of moonlight cutting across your floor, the distant sound of a woman singing a French lullaby, the smell of fresh-cut wood from a scaffold being built in darkness. Morning arrives with soft rain that muffles the tower's usual sounds. No drums today. The Queen's execution will be private, witnessed only by selected officials and tower residents. When your breakfast arrives, the servant who brings it looks tired, as though he hasn't slept. Is it today, then? You ask. He shakes his head. Delayed until tomorrow. The swordsman was late arriving from Calais. Another day of waiting for Anne Boleyn. Another day of the peculiar torture that only the tower truly understands how to administer, the extension of anticipation, the prolonging of dread, the expansion of the space between sentence and execution, until it becomes a universe of its own. Your questioning resumes after breakfast, but with a different tone. The lieutenant seems almost conversational now, reviewing details you've already provided, clarifying points of minimal importance, allowing the clerk to record everything without pressing for new revelations. By midday, he closes his book of notes with a sense of finality. I believe we have covered all necessary ground, he says. I will convey your account to the council today. And then, you ask, unable to keep the question behind your teeth, and then we wait for their determination. His expression softens slightly, the closest thing to sympathy you have seen from him. I would prepare yourself for additional days in the tower, regardless of their decision. These matters are rarely resolved quickly. After he leaves, you find yourself at loose ends, the structured questioning that has filled your days suddenly absent, leaving an emptiness more difficult to endure than the interrogation itself. You pace, you look out the window, you examine again the carvings left by previous occupants of your circular prison. In the afternoon, rain still falling softly outside, you hear something unexpected, the sound of a lute being played somewhere nearby, the notes rising clear and melancholy through the damp air. The melody is French, an old court tune that speaks of love and separation. It continues for perhaps 10 minutes, then falls silent. The Queen, you think. It must be her, or someone attending her. A final indulgence in the music she brought with her from the French court to the English one, now playing her toward an exit from both. The day passes slowly, unmarked by the routine that has structured your confinement until now. Evening brings your meal, and James again, permitted another brief visit. The Queen sent for her ladies today. He tells you as he helps you into fresh clothing he has brought. She made gifts of her few remaining possessions among them. They say she was most composed. Have you seen her? You ask. Only from a distance, being escorted to the chapel for prayers. She walks with dignity, head unbowed. You nod, unsurprised. Anne Boleyn ascended to unprecedented heights through force of will and intelligence. It seems she will depart the same way. There is other news, James adds, lowering his voice. Master Cromwell visited your brother yesterday. This is unexpected. Thomas Cromwell, the King's chief minister, architect of so many recent deaths, personally meeting with your family. What transpired? I cannot say for certain, but afterward, your brother looked hopeful. He sent me here with fresh linen and instructions to assure you that efforts continue on your behalf. A small flame of hope flickers within your chest. Cromwell would not waste his time with the family of a man already destined for the block. Perhaps your lengthy testimony has convinced him of your distance from the alleged conspiracy. Perhaps your usefulness to the crown outweighs any suspicion attached to your name. Perhaps you might yet leave the tower through Traitor's Gate, rather than in a simple wooden coffin. James must leave again at curfew, but his visit has lifted some of the grey weight that has pressed upon you since witnessing Rochford's execution. You sleep better than you have since arriving at the tower, your dreams less troubled by scaffolds and swords. Dawn comes with clearing skies, the rain replaced by a thin, watery sunshine that does little to warm the stone walls of your chamber. Today, Anne Boleyn will die. The knowledge hangs in the tower air like smoke, invisible but pervasive. Your breakfast arrives, brought by the regular tower servant rather than James. His face is solemn. They are preparing now, he says, without being asked. The scaffold stands ready on the green, not Tower Hill, where common traitors meet the axe, but the more private space within the tower walls. A queen, even a condemned one, retains certain privileges in death. The morning passes with excruciating slowness. No lieutenant arrives with questions, no clerk with parchment and quill. You are left alone with the knowledge of what approaches, minute by minute, until the church bells begin to toll 9 o'clock. You move to the window, drawn by the same compulsion that brought you there for Rochford's execution. The scaffold is visible, draped in black cloth, a small crowd of witnesses already assembled. Guards form a perimeter, pikes held vertically. Officials in dark robes stand in a tight group, their faces somber. Movement at the entrance to the Queen's lodgings. A small procession emerges, ladies in waiting, their heads bowed, the tower lieutenant, several guards, a priest walking with open prayer book, and at the center, a slight figure in dark grey, moving with measured steps toward the scaffold. Even from your high window, you can see that Anne Boleyn approaches her death with the same composure that marked her life. Her back is straight, her pace neither hurried nor hesitant, her head held high until the moment she must bow it to the sword. The small procession reaches the scaffold. Attendants help the Queen climb the steps, her ladies following a few paces behind. At the top, she turns to face the assembled witnesses. Like Rochford, she will be permitted a final speech, her last act as a figure of public significance. Though you cannot hear her words, you can see that she speaks at some length, her hands occasionally rising in graceful emphasis, her head turning to address different segments of the small crowd. The listeners stand motionless, witnessing a queen's final performance. When she finishes speaking, her ladies step forward. With gentle hands, they remove her headdress, then help her kneel on the black-draped platform. One of them binds her eyes with a cloth, another mercy, sparing her the sight of death's approach. The swordsman, who has stood slightly apart until now, moves into position. Unlike the English axe, the French sword requires no block, just a kneeling victim, head bowed, and a single horizontal stroke. As with Rochford, you look away at the final moment, but you hear the collective gasp from below, followed by that terrible complete silence that seems to fill the entire tower. When you force yourself to look again, the Queen's ladies are weeping, attending to her body with gentle hands, while tower officials oversee the prompt removal of all evidence of what has just occurred. Anne Boleyn has left the world as she entered the tower through a gate that swallowed her whole. Throughout the day, the atmosphere in the tower changes subtly. There is a release of tension, a collective exhalation, as though the entire complex has held its breath through the week of executions and can finally resume normal rhythms. The ravens return to their usual raucous calls. Guards speak to each other in normal tones rather than hushed whispers. Servants move through corridors with less furtive steps. The bloodletting is over. 6 lives have paid whatever price the king demanded. Now life, for those who remain, must continue. In the late afternoon, the lieutenant visits your chamber. His face gives away nothing, but he carries no questioning materials. No clerk accompanies him. You are to be relocated tomorrow, he says, without preamble, to more comfortable quarters in the Beauchamp Tower. You blink, momentarily unable to process this information. The Beauchamp Tower typically holds prisoners of rank who are not facing immediate execution, those who may be confined for political reasons, but retain hope of eventual release. I am to be moved, you repeat, wanting confirmation of what seems too fortunate to be true. At noon tomorrow, your servant will be permitted daily attendance between breakfast and curfew. He pauses, then adds, the council continues to review your case, but Master Cromwell has indicated that no formal charges are likely to be brought at present. No formal charges. The words echo in your mind, like bells announcing reprieve. Not freedom, not yet, but distance from the scaffold that has claimed so many lives this week. I am grateful, you say simply, knowing that any effusive thanks would be inappropriate. The lieutenant has merely carried out his duties. Gratitude properly belongs to whoever has intervened on your behalf. After the lieutenant leaves, you stand at the window for a long time, watching as the last evidence of the Queen's execution is removed from the Tower Green. By evening, only a worn patch of grass suggests that anything unusual happened there today. Your final night in the bell tower passes in a state of cautious relief. The walls that have contained you for nearly a week, walls that have witnessed your fear, your uncertainty, your proximity to death, now seem less oppressive, knowing you will soon leave them behind. You sleep deeply for the first time since your arrival. No dreams of scaffolds or swords disturbing your rest. When morning comes, you wake to a sense of possibility that has been absent since passing beneath Traitor's Gate. Breakfast arrives, brought by James rather than the tower servant. His face shows careful happiness, the measured joy of one who knows that danger has receded but not disappeared entirely. I am to help you gather your belongings for the move to Beauchamp, he says, setting down the tray, and I bring news. Your brother was received by the king yesterday. This is significant beyond measure. Direct royal audience suggests that whatever cloud of suspicion hung over your name has lifted substantially. What happened, you ask, barely touching your food, hunger forgotten in anticipation of his answer. His Majesty was gracious, I am told. He reminded your brother of past services to the crown and expressed hope that such loyalty would continue to mark your family's conduct. James pauses. It seems Master Cromwell spoke favorably of your cooperation during questioning. You exhale slowly, understanding the implicit message. You have been spared, not through any recognition of innocence, but through the pragmatic calculation of a king and his minister who see more value in your continued service than in your elimination. The Beauchamp Tower, then, you say, looking around the circular room that has been your world for these endless days. What accommodations await there? Larger chambers, my lord, windows facing westward, permission to exercise daily in the inner ward, under guard. Books may be brought from outside. Visitors may be received with a lieutenant's approval. A gilded cage, rather than a stone cell. Confinement still, but with the promise of eventual return to the world beyond the tower walls. At noon, as promised, guards arrive to escort you to your new quarters. You take one last look at the bell tower room, at the narrow window through which you witnessed death's visitation, at the walls carved with the marks of previous occupants, at the stone floor worn smooth by centuries of fearful pacing. Goodbye, you whisper, though whether to the room itself, or to the person you were when you entered it, you cannot say. The walk to the Beauchamp Tower takes you across the inner ward, past the spot where the Queen met her end just yesterday. Nothing remains to mark the place. No stain, no memorial, no visible evidence that a woman who once wore England's crown breathed her last breath there. The tower has already absorbed her story, adding it to the countless others held within its stones. As you cross the open space, you notice guards escorting another prisoner, a woman in simple dark clothing, her head covered with a hood despite the mild day. She walks with the uncertain steps of one recently arrived, still adjusting to the tower's rhythms. A new occupant for the Queen's lodgings, perhaps. The wheel turns. New prisoners replace the departed. The Beauchamp Tower welcomes you with chambers significantly more spacious than those you have left behind. Windows face west, as James promised, offering a view not of execution grounds, but of the outer ward, and, beyond, a slice of London continuing its busy life beyond these walls. The furnishings are modest but comfortable, a proper bed with a feather mattress, a table large enough for dining and writing, several chairs, a chest for clothing, even a small desk placed to catch the afternoon light. These will be your quarters until the council determines otherwise, the lieutenant explains. You may move freely within these rooms, but must remain within the Beauchamp Tower unless escorted by guards. Your servant may attend you during daylight hours. Meals will be provided as before. You nod, already feeling the subtle shift in status that these improved accommodations represent. You remain a prisoner, but one with prospects, with a future beyond these walls, however distant that future might currently seem. After the lieutenant leaves, you and James set about arranging your few possessions in the new space. The physical activity feels good, after days of enforced stillness, in your circular cell. Will you write to your wife today? James asks, as he unpacks the fresh clothing he has brought. I am permitted to carry letters, though they will be read by the lieutenant before leaving the tower. Yes, you decide. She should know that circumstances have improved, even if freedom remains uncertain. You sit at the small desk, pull a sheet of parchment toward you, and dip a quill into the ink provided. For a moment your hand hovers over the blank page. How to describe what you have witnessed, what you have learned, what you have survived. How to convey the feeling of watching death visit others while wondering if you would be next. In the end you write simply, My dearest wife, I am well and have been moved to better quarters in the tower. The king has received my brother graciously, which gives hope for eventual resolution. I think of you constantly, and trust in God's mercy to reunite us before too long. The words feel inadequate to express the gulf of experience that now separates you from the person who entered Traitor's Gate a week ago. But perhaps that is for the best. Some knowledge is better left unshared. The sound of a sword cutting through flesh, the precise quality of silence that follows an execution, the way hope dissolves in the damp tower air. James takes the letter, properly folded and sealed, promising to ensure its delivery after the lieutenant's review. Evening approaches, and with it, the requirement that he leave until morning. You find yourself less troubled by this separation than during your time in the bell tower. Here, the solitude feels less oppressive, the space less confining, the future less uncertain. As the curfew bell rings across the tower complex, you stand at your western window, watching the sun set over London's rooftops. Beyond the walls that have held you, life continues, merchants closing their shops, apprentices returning to their masters' homes, taverns filling with evening patrons, churches preparing for vespers, you remain separated from that world, held in stone embrace by walls that have witnessed centuries of similar confinements. But unlike the 6 souls who entered the tower alongside you this week, you will likely leave it alive. This knowledge, that you have survived an execution week in the Tower of London, settles around your shoulders like a weight, not the crushing pressure of fear that accompanied your arrival through Traitor's Gate, but something more complex, the burden of having witnessed history's darker machinery at work, of having heard death's footsteps pass your door only to continue to another's. In the gathering darkness, you offer a silent prayer for those who did not survive: Rochford, Smeaton, Norris, Bredreton, Weston, and finally the Queen herself. Whatever their guilt or innocence, they are beyond earthly judgment now. Their stories ended while yours continues. Tomorrow will bring another day in the tower, but a day with better prospects, in better quarters, with less dread shadowing each hour. You have passed through the heart of Tudor justice, and emerged, if not unscathed, at least alive. The walls that have listened too closely to all your fears and doubts will continue their silent vigil. But for you, the immediate danger has passed. The walls now protect as much as they confine, sheltering you until the political winds shift enough to permit your return to the world beyond. You turn from the window. As full darkness falls over the tower, there will be more days of confinement, more moments of uncertainty, more prayers for release, but you have survived the week that claimed 6 lives. You have witnessed the tower's most terrible purpose, and been spared its ultimate judgment. For now that is enough. The rhythm of death in Tudor England follows patterns as predictable as the changing seasons, yet as startling as sudden frost. You learn this during your extended stay in the Beauchamp Tower, where days bleed into weeks, and the initial relief of having survived the Queen's execution week gradually transforms into a different kind of imprisonment, less acute in its terror, more grinding in its uncertainty. June arrives with unexpected warmth. Your western windows catch the afternoon sun, heating your chambers until James must leave them open, despite the tower rules preferring them closed. Through these openings, you hear London continuing beyond the walls, church bells marking the hours, carts rumbling over cobblestones, occasional shouts from the river where bargemen call to one another, life proceeding in its ordinary rhythms, while yours remain suspended. The king has married again, James informs you one morning, as he helps you dress in fresh linen. It has been just 11 days since Anne Boleyn's execution. Lady Jane Seymour became queen on the Feast of Pentecost. You receive this information with careful neutrality. The rapid replacement of one queen with another explains much about the swift justice meted out to Anne and her supposed accomplices. To clear the path for this new marriage, the old one needed to be not merely ended, but obliterated, its participants removed beyond possibility of contradiction. Does this bode well for those still in the tower? Do you ask, keeping your voice low, despite being alone with James? The walls you have learned do indeed listen too closely. It may, James replies, equally cautious. The new queen is said to favor reconciliation, where possible. Several who were questioned during the late queen's fall have been released already. This news kindles a small flame of hope. Perhaps the king's new happiness will incline him toward mercy for those peripherally caught in the destruction of his previous marriage. Perhaps your continued cooperation during questioning will be rewarded with freedom rather than mere improved accommodations. As if summoned by these thoughts, the lieutenant appears at your door shortly after midday. His expression reveals nothing, as usual, but he carries a sealed letter rather than questioning materials. From the Privy Council, he says, handing you the document. I am instructed to wait for your response. The seal breaks with a small crack that seems unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Inside, formal language conveys a simple message. You are required to swear an oath, acknowledging the king as supreme head of the Church of England, recognizing his new marriage as lawful, and repudiating the authority of the Bishop of Rome, falsely called Pope. The test of loyalty, thinly disguised as legal formality. Many have refused this oath and paid with their lives. Others have sworn it with fingers crossed behind their backs, mouths speaking words their hearts reject. For you the choice seems clear. Your reservations about Henry's religious innovations are far outweighed by your desire to return to your family and estates. I will swear, you tell the lieutenant, who nods as though he expected nothing else. The council will send representatives tomorrow to administer the oath formally, he says. I suggest you prepare yourself appropriately. After he leaves, you sit by the window, holding the letter with its list of required declarations. The price of your freedom is spelled out in careful script, not merely an oath of allegiance to the king, which you would give willingly, but explicit rejection of Rome's authority, which troubles your conscience more deeply. The Beauchamp Tower has held many who refused, you murmur to yourself, running your fingers along the stone windowsill. Names carved into walls throughout this building commemorate Catholics who chose imprisonment or death rather than deny papal authority. Will your compliance dishonor their sacrifice, or is it simply prudent survival in a kingdom where religious winds shift with royal whims? You sleep poorly that night, troubled by dreams of scaffolds that transform into altars, axes that become crucifixes, executioners who wear papal robes beneath their ordinary clothing. When dawn finally arrives, you rise feeling unrested, but resolved. You will swear the oath. You will return to your family. You will find ways to reconcile your conscience later. The council representatives arrive mid-morning. 3 men in rich clothing, their faces solemn with the importance of their mission. The oath is administered in your chambers, the words echoing against stone walls that have heard similar declarations countless times before. You speak clearly, without hesitation, calling on God to witness your sincerity, while silently asking his forgiveness for any compromise of belief. It is done, says the eldest representative. When you finish, the council will be informed of your compliance and my release. You ask, unable to keep the question behind your teeth. The man's expression softens slightly. Matters proceed favorably. Master Cromwell has spoken for you. Patience a while longer. They leave without further explanation, taking with them the signed document bearing your oath. You are left to wonder how much longer patience might be required. How many more days of watching western sunlight travel across your chamber floor? How many more nights of dreaming of home? As it happens, patience a while longer means 3 more weeks. 3 weeks of improved, but still limited rations, of daily exercise in the inner ward, under guard, of letters to and from your wife carefully reviewed by Tower officials before delivery. 3 weeks of watching new prisoners arrive through Traitor's Gate, while wondering when you might exit through it. During these weeks, you become aware of the Tower's larger rhythms, the cycles of confinement, judgment, and execution that continue regardless of which queen wears England's crown. From your window, and during your supervised walks, you observe the procession of the condemned and the fortunate, learning to distinguish between those likely to leave alive and those destined for the scaffold. The northern rebels arrive today, James tells you one afternoon in late June, his voice low, as he helps you into fresh clothing after your exercise period. 5 of them, led by Lord Darcy. They're housed in the White Tower dungeons. It's a pilgrimage of grace, a northern uprising against the king's religious policies, brutally suppressed earlier in the year. You had heard rumors of mass executions in Yorkshire, but it seems some leaders were brought to London for more formal justice. Will they be tried? You ask, though you already suspect the answer. James nods grimly. Tower Hill has been prepared. They say the king wants examples made. 2 days later, you witness their final journey. From your window, you watch 5 men led from the White Tower toward the western gate, beyond which Tower Hill and its waiting scaffold lie. They walk with varying degrees of dignity, one stumbling between guards, another with head held high, the others somewhere between collapse and composure. Lord Darcy, you note, walks steadily despite his advanced age. Even at a distance, you can see the straight back, the measured pace, the refusal to be hurried toward death. A nobleman meeting his end with the dignity his rank demands, despite the indignity of his alleged treason. The procession disappears through the gate. Within the hour, distant roars from the crowd, gathered on Tower Hill, announce each execution, 5 bursts of collective sound, marking 5 transitions from life to death, from flesh to memory. That evening, 5 bodies return to the tower, not through the gate they exited, but carried unceremoniously to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula for burial. No coffins, just shrouds, no mourners, just guards and tower officials, ensuring proper disposal of traitors' remains. You watch this processional from behind half-closed shutters, aware that you witness a ritual as old as the tower itself. The axe has completed its work for today. The stone will keep the secrets of the dead, and tomorrow the machinery of Tudor justice will seek new subjects for its attention. July begins with unexpected activity in the tower complex. From your daily exercise periods, you observe renovations underway in the royal apartments, areas typically used when the monarch visits, which has not occurred during your confinement. The king comes to oversee water pageantry on the Thames. James explains when you ask. The new queen will accompany him. They stay only 2 nights. The news sends conflicting emotions through you. The king's presence might either accelerate your release or emphasize your continued imprisonment. His new marriage might have softened his heart toward former associates of Anne Boleyn, or it might have reinforced his determination to erase all connections to his previous wife. Will petitions be heard, do you ask? Daring to hope, James shakes his head. This visit is for pleasure, not business of state. The water pageant celebrates the royal marriage. Still, the royal presence transforms the tower's atmosphere. Guards stand straighter, servants hurry more purposefully, officials speak in more hushed tones. Even the ravens seem to sense the impending royal arrival, gathering in unusual numbers along the walls, their harsh calls creating an unsettling chorus. On the morning the king is expected, you are surprised by a visit from the lieutenant, who arrives with 2 tower servants, carrying a trunk. You are to prepare yourself to attend the royal water pageant, he announces, gesturing to the trunk. These contain appropriate attire. You will be escorted to the royal viewing platform on the wharf when the time comes. Stunned, you can only nod as the trunk is placed near your bed, and the lieutenant continues his instructions. You will not speak unless directly addressed by His Majesty or the Queen. You will remain between guards at all times. You will make no attempt to communicate with anyone outside the tower official party. He pauses, then adds, this opportunity for limited participation in royal festivities should be considered a sign of improving circumstances. After he leaves, you and James open the trunk to find clothing of quality far exceeding what you've worn during your confinement, a doublet of dark blue velvet with silver embroidery, matching hose, a short cloak lined with grey silk, shoes of soft leather, and a cap adorned with a single white feather. Court clothes, James murmurs, running his fingers over the fine fabric. Someone has intervened strongly on your behalf, or I am being prepared for a more public reconciliation than expected, you suggest, hardly daring to believe your own words. The afternoon brings increased activity throughout the tower complex. From your window you watch nobles and officials arrive by river and land entrances, all converging toward the royal apartments. Their rich clothing and animated conversations speak of anticipation rather than dread, so different from those who arrive through Traitor's Gate. At 4 o'clock, guards arrive to escort you to the royal viewing platform. Dressed in your finery, you feel simultaneously more yourself and utterly transformed, the familiar weight of proper clothing, a reminder of your true station, yet the circumstances making you acutely aware of how precarious that station remains. The walk through the tower complex provides your first glimpse of areas beyond your limited permitted territory. Servants hurry about with trays of refreshments, musicians tune instruments near doorways, guards in ceremonial rather than functional attire stand at rigid attention. The viewing platform extends from the tower's riverside wall, providing an unobstructed view of the Thames. Already it holds 24 courtiers, arranged in precise hierarchy, with an empty space at the center, obviously reserved for the royal couple. You are positioned toward the rear of the platform, between two guards as promised, visible but not prominent. Remember, murmurs the guard to your left, speak only if addressed. You nod, your attention focused on the assembled courtiers, searching for familiar faces. You recognize several privy councillors, a handful of nobles who have retained royal favor through multiple queens, and most importantly, your brother, positioned more favorably than yourself, but still not in the inner circle. Your eyes meet briefly across the platform. His face reveals careful optimism, a slight nod conveying support without risking overt communication that might displease your guards. A trumpet fanfare announces the royal arrival. Conversation ceases instantly as King Henry VIII and his new queen Jane Seymour emerge onto the platform. The king moves with the deliberate pace of a man conscious of persistent leg pain but determined not to show weakness. Beside him, Queen Jane walks with downcast eyes, her pale beauty emphasized by simple but rich attire, so different from her vivacious, dark-haired predecessor. Everyone bows or curtsies as the royal couple takes their central position. When you rise from your own deep obeisance, you find the king's gaze moving across the assembled courtiers, his expression revealing nothing until he reaches your position. For a heartbeat that seems to stretch into eternity, Henry Tudor looks directly at you. No smile softens his features, no frown indicates displeasure, just assessment, calculation, memory. Then his attention moves on, and you release a breath you hadn't realized you were holding. The water pageant begins, a procession of decorated barges moving upriver past the tower, their oarsmen keeping precise formation, musicians playing from their decks, occasionally shooting fountains of water into the air to general applause from spectators along both banks. Throughout the display, you remain acutely aware of your position, physically present at a royal celebration, yet still a prisoner, dressed as a courtier, yet flanked by guards, included in festivities, yet excluded from true participation. The pageant continues for nearly 2 hours, culminating in a mock naval battle between barges representing English and foreign vessels, with the English naturally emerging victorious. The king appears genuinely entertained, occasionally laughing or commenting to those nearest him. The queen smiles politely but speaks little, her hands folded modestly before her. As the final vessels depart, and twilight begins to settle over the Thames, servants appear with wine and sweetmeats for the royal couple and highest-ranking guests. You receive nothing, nor do you expect to. Your presence was permission enough, sustenance unnecessary. The king rises, signaling the conclusion of the viewing. As courtiers prepare to follow the royal couple back to the main tower complex for continued festivities, you resign yourself to being escorted back to your chambers. The brief taste of court life has been pleasant, but ultimately bittersweet, reminding you of all you've lost during your confinement. But as the platform begins to clear, an unexpected development occurs. Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, approaches your position, his face bearing its usual inscrutable expression. His Majesty has noted your presence, he says, without preamble. You are to join the evening's entertainment, though remaining under guard. This represents a significant elevation from mere viewing platform. Attendance inclusion in the inner festivities, however limited, suggests far more favor than you had dared hope for. Your guards escort you to the great hall of the royal apartments, where musicians play, servants circulate with wine and delicacies, and courtiers engage in careful conversation gauged to entertain without risking offense. Again you are positioned peripherally, able to observe, but not fully participate, included, but constrained. Your brother manages to maneuver near your position during a pavan performed for the royal couple's entertainment. As dancers move in their stately patterns, he speaks quickly, quietly, his lips barely moving. Master Cromwell is satisfied with your testimony. The Queen has spoken for leniency for those not directly implicated in the late unpleasantness. Your release is being prepared, but appearances must be maintained for now. Before you can respond, he moves away, rejoining the General Assembly without drawing attention to your brief communication. But his words leave you light-headed with relief and hope. Release, not immediate, but in process. Return to life beyond stone walls. Reunion with family and responsibility. The evening proceeds with the measured pageantry that characterizes all Tudor court functions. The king remains seated throughout, his injured leg propped discreetly on a cushioned stool, his attention divided between the entertainment and his quiet queen. Occasionally his gaze sweeps the assembly, including your position, but he makes no direct acknowledgement of your presence. When the royal couple finally retires, the gathering dissolves quickly. Your guards step forward to escort you back to the Beauchamp Tower, their manner slightly less rigid than before, perhaps reflecting your improved status. Tomorrow, one murmurs, as you approach your chambers, there may be news. You sleep deeply that night, exhausted by the emotional intensity of the day's events, and comforted by your brother's whispered assurance. Your dreams are not of scaffolds and axes, but of your own estates, green fields, familiar halls, family gathered around tables laden with food and wine. Morning brings James with breakfast and carefully suppressed excitement. The lieutenant will visit after you've eaten, he says, arranging bread and fruit with unusual precision. I've been instructed to prepare your belongings. Your heart beats faster at this confirmation of impending change. Whether full release or transfer to house arrest at one of your properties, any movement from the tower represents significant improvement. The lieutenant arrives as promised, bearing formal documents rather than keys or questioning materials. His expression remains neutral, but there is a slight relaxation around his eyes that suggests he brings welcome news. By order of the King's most gracious Majesty, he begins, unfolding the first document. You are to be released from confinement in the Tower of London, having satisfied the Council's inquiry into certain matters and having demonstrated your continued loyalty to the crown through proper oath and comportment, the words wash over you like cool water after long thirst. Released, freedom, return. There are conditions, the lieutenant continues, moving to the second document. You are to remain within 20 miles of London until further notice. You will present yourself at court when summoned. You will not communicate with any persons previously associated with the late Queen. You will attend services in accordance with the King's religious settlements. Restrictions, yes, but so much lighter than stone walls and locked doors. You would agree to far more onerous conditions to secure your liberty. I understand and accept these terms, you say, your voice steadier than you feel. When am I permitted to depart? This afternoon, after you have signed these acknowledgments and surrendered any written materials produced during your confinement. He pauses, then adds, you will exit through the main gate, not Traitor's Gate. A significant distinction. Indeed it is. Those who return through Traitor's Gate usually do so as corpses for burial. Exit through the main gate marks you as one released, not one condemned, a distinction that means everything in the tower's grim ledger. The remainder of the morning passes in a flurry of preparation. You sign the required documents, surrender the few written notes you made during your confinement, and allow tower officials to examine your belongings before packing. James moves efficiently, his happiness evident despite his attempts at professional restraint. As noon approaches, you take a final walk through your chambers in the Beauchamp Tower. These walls have held you for weeks, far better than the bell tower's circular confinement, but still a prison. You have watched summer light move across the stone floor, counted ravens from the western windows, listened to the tower's rhythms of life and death. You pause at a section of wall where previous prisoners carved their names or symbols, some elaborate, others simple, all expressions of the human need to leave a mark, to be remembered. You have added nothing to this gallery of confinement, having preferred to focus on eventual release rather than commemorating your time here. But now, in your final moments within these walls, you find yourself tracing the outline of a small ship carved near the window, the same symbol of hoped-for freedom that caught your attention during your first days here. Beneath it, almost too small to notice without searching, someone has etched a single word, persevere. It is time, my lord, James says from the doorway, where he waits with the lieutenant and 2 guards who will escort you to the main gate. You nod, taking a final breath of tower air, the strange mixture of damp stone, distant Thames, and something indefinable that permeates every corner of this ancient fortress. Then you turn and walk away from your confinement, each step carrying you closer to the world beyond. The journey through the tower complex provides a different perspective than your arrival through Traitor's Gate. You pass the White Tower standing proudly at the center, the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where executed bodies rest in unmarked graves, the green where scaffolds periodically appear and disappear like strange flowers blooming and dying in their season. Near the main gate, you encounter an unexpected sight, a group of new prisoners being processed by tower officials. 3 men in clerical garb, their expressions varying from defiance to resignation to barely suppressed terror. Catholic priests, most likely, refusing to acknowledge the king's supremacy over the English church. As you pass this group, your eyes meet briefly with the youngest priest, a man perhaps 30 years old, his face pale but composed, his hands clutched around a small prayer book the tower guards have not yet taken from him. In that momentary connection, you recognize something familiar, the same uncertainty you felt upon your own arrival, the same question hanging unspoken, Will I leave this place alive? For you that question has been answered favorably. For him, the tower's stones will keep their counsel a while longer. The main gate stands open to admit a merchant's cart delivering supplies. Beyond it lies London, noisy, smelly, crowded, magnificent in its chaotic vitality. After weeks of stone enclosure and regulated movement, the city's organic sprawl feels almost intimidating in its freedom. Your brother awaits beyond the gate, the lieutenant informs you. Remember the terms of your release. I shall, you assure him, and I thank you for the considerations extended during my confinement. He nods once, accepting your diplomatically phrased gratitude for whatever small mercies he provided, privacy during difficult moments, permission for James to attend you, perhaps even your inclusion in yesterday's royal festivities. The tower serves the king's justice, he says simply. When that justice includes mercy, we serve that as well. With these words, perhaps the most revealing personal statement you've heard from him, he steps back, signaling the guards to escort you the final distance to the gate. You cross the threshold from imprisonment to freedom with measured steps, neither rushing, which might suggest desperate relief, nor dawdling, which might indicate reluctance to leave the tower's protection. Beyond the shadow of the gatehouse, your brother waits beside a small party on horseback, his face breaking into a smile when he sees you emerge. Welcome back to London, he says, embracing you briefly before helping you mount a horse prepared for your journey. Your wife awaits at Baynard's castle. We thought it best not to bring her here. You nod, understanding completely. No woman who loves her husband would wish to see the tower where so many have entered, never to return alive. As your small party moves away from the tower, you resist the urge to look back. Better to face forward, toward home and family, toward whatever future awaits beyond this period of confinement. But you cannot help being aware of what remains behind, the stones that witnessed your fear and uncertainty, the walls that listened too closely to every whispered prayer, the axe that arrived on time for others while sparing you its attention. The tower has released you, but it has also marked you in ways that may never fully fade. Your brother rides close beside you, speaking quietly about arrangements made during your absence, debts managed, properties maintained. His voice, practical, familiar, concerned with ordinary matters, gradually draws you away from tower thoughts toward the responsibilities awaiting your return. The king has summoned a new parliament for September, he mentions, shifting to political matters. Master Cromwell indicates you will be expected to attend and support the crown's religious settlements. The price of freedom, visible support for the very policies that sent others to the scaffold. You think briefly of the young priest you passed at the Tower Gate, wonder if he will still be alive when Parliament convenes, wonder what accommodation your conscience will make with political necessity. I shall serve as loyalty requires, you respond, the careful phrase satisfying obligation, without specifying exactly where your loyalty's deepest roots lie. London surrounds you now, vibrant, malodorous, insistent in its demands for attention. After weeks of stone silence, punctuated only by official voices and distant executions, the city's cacophony feels simultaneously overwhelming and exhilarating. Street vendors call their wares, apprentices shout to one another, church bells mark the hours, cartwheels rattle over cobblestones. Life, messy, unpredictable, glorious life. You ride through streets that seem both familiar and strange, passing citizens who take no particular notice of your party. To them you are merely another nobleman returning from business at the Tower, not someone who has witnessed the execution of a queen, not someone who has counted each sunrise as perhaps his last, not someone who has learned exactly how hope dissolves in the presence of absolute power. Baynard's castle appears ahead, your brother's London residence, where your family awaits. The sight of its towers rising above the surrounding buildings stirs emotions too complex for simple naming. Relief, certainly, joy at impending reunion, but also a strange disorientation, as though the person who enters this familiar place will never quite be the same as the one who left it for the tower weeks ago. In the courtyard, your wife waits with your children, all dressed in their finest, their faces caught between smiles and tears. As you dismount, they surround you with embraces and exclamations, their voices overlapping in welcome. Your wife's eyes search yours, looking beyond the surface happiness to whatever changes confinement has wrought. "You are well?" she asks softly, her question carrying deeper inquiry than its simple words suggest. "I am free," you answer, the distinction important. "Well enough, and growing better with each step away from that place." She nods, understanding, as she always has. Later, in private, you will tell her more, perhaps not everything, but enough for her to comprehend what the tower taught you about power and survival in Tudor England. The household has prepared a celebration for your return, modest enough not to draw unwanted attention, but sufficient to mark the occasion properly. Wine flows, musicians play quietly in the hall, servants bring dishes of your favorite foods. Throughout the evening, you find yourself startled by small pleasures previously taken for granted, the ability to move freely between rooms, to speak without weighing each word for potential treason, to look up and see sky rather than stone. Only once does the tower intrude directly upon the celebration. As twilight deepens outside the windows, distant bells toll across the city, not the regular marking of hours, but the distinctive pattern announcing an execution at the tower. The young priest perhaps, or another unfortunate whose judgment came swiftly, the axe arriving on time, as it always does for someone in Henry's England. Conversation around you continues uninterrupted. Only you and your brother seem to notice the bells, exchanging a brief glance of recognition before returning to the celebrations. The others, never having heard those bells from within the tower walls, do not recognize their significance or choose to ignore it on this happy occasion. Later that night, lying beside your wife in a proper bed with linens that smell of lavender rather than fear, you find sleep elusive despite physical exhaustion. When you do drift off, your dreams are not of home, but of stone corridors, of scaffold steps, of faces glimpsed through narrow windows. You wake before dawn, momentarily disoriented by the absence of confining walls, by the softness of the mattress beneath you, by the sound of your wife's steady breathing beside you rather than a guard's footsteps in the corridor outside. Rising quietly to avoid disturbing her, you move to the window. From this higher vantage point, you can see the tower in the distance, a darker shadow against the gradually lightening sky, its walls containing stories you now understand too well. How many wake within those walls this morning, wondering if today brings the axe to their neck? How many listen for footsteps that might indicate good news or bad? How many trace the carvings of previous prisoners and wonder whether to add their own marks to those ancient stones? As dawn breaks fully over London, you turn away from the window and the tower beyond. You have survived what many do not. You have witnessed the machinery of Tudor justice and emerged to describe it, though perhaps not too loudly or to too many ears. The axe that always arrives on time has passed you by, at least for now. The walls that listen too closely no longer confine your words or thoughts. The gate that swallowed hope has released you back into the world of possibilities and obligations. You are changed, Certainly. Warrior, perhaps, more conscious of how quickly fortune's wheel can turn, how easily favor can transform into fatal suspicion, how thoroughly power can remake truth to serve its purposes. But you are alive. And in Henry's England, with its scaffolds and swords, its oaths and interrogations, its carefully orchestrated destructions and constructions of royal will, simply being alive to greet another dawn represents victory of a kind. Your wife stirs in the bed behind you. Your children will soon wake in their chambers down the hall. Your responsibilities await, to family, to estate, to careful navigation of the perilous waters of Tudor politics. Life beckons, with all its complicated demands and rewards. You turn from the window, leaving the tower to its distant vigil, and prepare to meet the day. Time passes differently beyond the tower walls, not measured by the slow drip of water on stone, or the precise rhythm of God's changing watch, but by seasons shifting, children growing, political fortunes rising and falling with the king's volatile favor. 2 years have passed since your release, years in which you have carefully rebuilt your position at court while navigating the increasingly dangerous religious divisions of Henry's England. It is autumn now, leaves turning gold and crimson across your country estates, as you prepare for a commanded appearance at Hampton Court. The royal summons arrived 3 days ago, its wording deliberately vague, to attend His Majesty on matters of state and personal significance. Such ambiguity always causes a moment of dread, a brief, cold memory of Traitor's Gate and stone walls. But you have maintained your cautious loyalty since release, supported Cromwell's policies in Parliament, attended Reformed church services with appropriate regularity. There is no reason to fear this summons represents danger rather than routine courtly obligation. You travel with a small retinue, enough to reflect your restored status, but not so large as to suggest improper ambition. The journey to Hampton Court takes 2 days, the roads crowded with others similarly summoned for what appears to be a larger gathering than usual. The king reviews his council's achievements, explains a fellow traveler you encounter at an inn along the way. 5 years since the break with Rome was formalized. Progress to be celebrated, resistors to be noted, celebrations and notations, the twin pillars of Tudor governance. To be celebrated means continued favor, increased responsibility, perhaps new titles or lands. To be noted often means scrutiny, questioning, potential disgrace. Hampton Court receives you with its particular brand of carefully orchestrated chaos, servants hurrying through vast corridors, courtiers clustered in strategic locations, exchanging information and influence, guards watching impassively from every doorway. The palace breathes power, its very air scented with ambition and anxiety. You are assigned chambers commensurate with your rank, modest but comfortable, shared with only 2 other gentlemen of similar standing. After settling your belongings, you seek information about the gathering's purpose, connecting with carefully maintained allies who might share insights not available to those less plugged into court currents. Cromwell orchestrates a demonstration of religious unity, confides one such connection, a clerk in the royal secretary's office, grateful for past favors and willing to share non-sensitive intelligence. The king grows weary of Catholic resistance in the north. Examples may be made. Examples. The word sends a shiver through memory. You have witnessed what examples mean in Henry's England, the precise stroke of a sword, the collective gasp of witnesses, the silence that follows. That night, the court gathers for a formal dinner in the great hall. The king presides, flanked by his 5th wife, Catherine Howard, a girl young enough to be his daughter, her pretty face animated by the excitement of her position, clearly unaware of how precarious queenship has proven for her predecessors. Thomas Cromwell sits at the high table as well, but noticeably farther from the king than in previous gatherings. His expression reveals nothing, but those who understand court choreography note the distance and draw their conclusions. The architect of the king's religious policy appears less favored than before, the ground beneath him subtly shifting. You observe all this from your position, several tables removed from the royal presence, close enough to demonstrate continued acceptance at court, distant enough to suggest you have not fully regained the inner circle status you once enjoyed. During the elaborate courses, whispers travel among the courtiers, passed with bread and wine. 5 northern lords, to be attainted for treasonable correspondence with Rome. The abbot of Glastonbury refused to surrender his monastery. Tower interrogation to follow. Bishop Gardiner gains influence daily, speaks against Cromwell's religious settlements. The currents of Tudor power shift, visibly in this great hall, alliances forming and dissolving over peacock pie and hippocras. You participate minimally, offering bland observations when directly addressed, avoiding commitment to any faction. Your time in the Tower taught the value of such neutrality. After the meal, entertainment follows. Musicians, a masque depicting England's liberation from papal tyranny, poetry celebrating the king's wisdom and courage. Throughout, Henry sits heavily in his great chair, his injured leg extended before him, his face alternating between pleasure at the performances and pain from his festering wound. Catherine Howard attends him with visible effort at wifely concern, though her eyes occasionally wander to younger courtiers when she believes herself unobserved. You notice Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the king's privy chamber, returning the queen's glances with dangerous openness. History prepares to repeat itself, it seems. The Tower may soon welcome another queen through Traitor's Gate. The following morning brings the gathering's true purpose into focus. The court assembles in the Chapel Royal for a service celebrating England's religious settlement. The Archbishop of Canterbury himself presides, his reformed liturgy emphasizing royal supremacy and scriptural authority. During the sermon, the king's gaze moves deliberately across the assembled courtiers, noting who appears fully engaged and who merely goes through expected motions. You maintain an expression of appropriate devotion, having learned that survival in Tudor England often depends on such performances. After the service, selected nobles and officials, yourself included, are summoned to the council chamber. There, the true business commences. His Majesty requires visible unity in matters of faith. Thomas Cromwell announces, standing beside the king's empty throne. The monarch himself has withdrawn, his leg pain too severe for lengthy council sessions. Those present will sign the declaration of reformed faith and identify any known to resist the king's religious settlements. The document circulates, dozens of pages, detailing theological positions on transubstantiation, clerical marriage, papal authority, English scripture. To sign means full commitment to Henry's middle path between Catholic tradition and Protestant reform. To refuse means, well, the Tower demonstrates what refusal means. When the document reaches you, you sign without hesitation, your name joining scores of others already inscribed. The quill scratches against parchment, the sound reminiscent of your testimony during Tower questioning years earlier. Another pledge, another compromise, another step away from private conscience toward public conformity. Furthermore, Cromwell continues when all have signed. His Majesty commands each present to examine their own households and local communities for signs of treasonable religious obstinacy. Reports will be delivered monthly to my office. Informers. The king wants every nobleman to become an informer, reporting on neighbors, servants, tenants who might harbor Catholic sympathies or Protestant excesses. The room remains silent, but the air fills with unspoken resistance to this extension of royal authority into private domains. Cromwell senses this hesitation. His Majesty rewards loyalty, he adds, eyes moving across concerned faces, and remembers its absence. The threat lies naked beneath his words. Report on others, or be reported on yourself. The machinery that sent Anne Boleyn and her supposed lovers to their deaths continues its operation, only the targets changing with royal whim. You leave the council chamber with the weight of this new obligation pressing upon your conscience, to report sincere Catholics among your tenants and servants, people whose only crime is maintaining the faith you yourself were raised in, feels like betrayal. But to refuse means risking everything rebuilt since your Tower confinement. That evening, while courtiers engage in carefully light-hearted entertainment, you find yourself drawn to Hampton Court's Chapel Royal, now empty after the day's official observances. The space holds an uncomfortable duality: traditional Catholic architecture, now housing Reformed Protestant worship. Like England itself, like your own divided heart, it exists in two worlds simultaneously. You sit in a rear pew, the chapel illuminated only by moonlight through stained glass and a few devotional candles near the altar. Here, in relative privacy, you finally confront the compromise that has allowed your survival and restoration. At what cost? You whisper, the words barely disturbing the silence. And what cost to soul and honor? The oldest question at court. Comes an unexpected response from nearby shadows. One asked by every man who serves Henry Tudor. You turn, startled, to find Thomas Cromwell himself seated several pews behind you, his figure almost invisible in the dim light. The king's chief minister, architect of religious reformation and countless executions, watches you with unreadable eyes. Master Cromwell, you acknowledge, rising to bow slightly. I did not realize anyone else sought the chapel's quiet. I find myself drawn here increasingly often, he replies, his voice low, but carrying clearly in the empty space. Perhaps for similar reasons as yourself. You hesitate, uncertain whether this represents danger or unexpected confidence. Cromwell has been your patron of sorts, arguing for your release from the Tower, but his own position appears increasingly precarious as the king's religious policies shift yet again. The king's commands today troubled many consciences, you venture, careful to criticize the reaction rather than the command itself. Cromwell's laugh holds no humor. Conscience is luxury in Henry's service. I surrendered mine years ago. He pauses, then adds more softly, though in moments like this, I sometimes hear its faint protest still. This admission, from the man who orchestrated monastery dissolutions, who sent Thomas More and Anne Boleyn to their deaths, who created the very religious settlement you've just pledged to enforce, strikes you speechless. You survived the Tower, Cromwell continues after a moment. Not everyone does. I arranged your release because you demonstrated adaptability, the essential quality for continued existence in this reign. I am grateful. You reply automatically. Don't be. I merely recognized a useful ally. His voice turns suddenly blunt, practical. The ground shifts beneath us all. The king's leg festers, his pain grows, his religious sympathies drift back toward Rome, in all but name. Those who implemented his previous policies may find themselves expendable. The warning is clear. The why Cromwell chooses to deliver it remains uncertain. What would you have me do? You ask directly. Survive, he says simply, as I have tried to do, as we all must, in these uncertain times. He rises slowly, his figure still mostly shadow in the dim chapel. Keep your tower lessons close. They will serve you in what comes. Without further explanation, he departs, footsteps fading into chapel silence. You remain seated, his words echoing. The ground shifts beneath us all. 3 days later, the Hampton Court gathering concludes with formal audiences before the king. Henry receives selected courtiers briefly, accepting renewed pledges of loyalty, dispensing minor favors or reprimands according to his assessment of each subject's recent service. When your turn comes, you approach the throne with practiced deference, kneeling despite perfectly healthy legs before a king who can barely stand on his own. The contrast would be comic if the power imbalance weren't so absolute. You keep your obligations since release? Henry asks directly, his once handsome face now bloated, eyes shrewdly assessing beneath heavy lids. In all things, your majesty, you respond. My loyalty remains absolute. He studies you a moment longer. Good. We have use for men who learn proper lessons from the Tower's hospitality. His hand extends, offering the ring of England for the traditional kiss of fealty. Return to your estates. Watch for religious sedition among your tenants. Report as commanded. As your majesty wishes, you murmur, lips brushing cold metal. The ritual complete, you back away from the royal presence, careful never to turn your back on the king. A courtly tradition that feels suddenly uncomfortably practical. You depart Hampton Court the following morning, your small party joining the exodus of courtiers returning to country estates and London residences. The autumn air carries the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and something else, something less tangible but equally present, apprehension. Cromwell's warning, delivered in chapel shadows, travels with you. The ground shifts beneath us all. The man who engineered your freedom now hints at his own precarious position. In Henry's England, yesterday's architect of policy can become tomorrow's traitor with frightening speed. Winter arrives with bitter cold and news that confirms Cromwell's worries. Royal commissioners visit monasteries that had previously been spared dissolution, claiming evidence of continued papal loyalty. Northern nobles who signed loyalty oaths find themselves questioned about private religious observances. The machinery of suspicion grinds forward, claiming new victims. You comply with royal commands, sending monthly reports documenting your tenants' church attendance, noting no suspicious Catholic practices or Protestant excesses. Your communications remain carefully neutral, offering sufficient information to demonstrate compliance, while avoiding specifics that might endanger people under your protection. Spring brings shocking news. Thomas Cromwell, Baron of Essex, Lord Great Chamberlain, architect of Henry's break with Rome, has been arrested on charges of treason and heresy. The man who warned you of shifting ground has himself fallen through sudden cracks in the Tudor court. He championed the king's marriage to Anne of Cleves, your brother explains during a hasty visit to your country estate. When Henry found her displeasing, Cromwell's enemies seized their opportunity. The Duke of Norfolk leads the prosecution. The Tower holds him now. The Tower, again that cold stone presence, enters your thoughts, its walls now containing the very man who secured your release from its confines. You recall his chapel words, "Conscience is luxury in Henry's service. I surrendered mine years ago." What private regrets occupy Cromwell's thoughts as he paces a cell similar to the one you once inhabited? What secrets does he carry that may die with him when the axe completes its inevitable arc? Summer arrives with a royal command you cannot ignore: attendance at Cromwell's execution on Tower Hill. Not a private affair within Tower walls, but a public spectacle designed to demonstrate the consequences of losing royal favor. You travel to London with leaden heart, taking rooms at your brother's city residence, rather than risk any association with the convicted man by visiting him in confinement. Self-preservation has become instinct now, shaped by tower memories and court observations. The morning of execution dawns clear and warm, pleasant weather for the thousands of Londoners who gather on Tower Hill to witness the fall of a man many hated for his religious policies and humble origins. You take your assigned place among officials required to attend, your presence documenting proper allegiance to the king's judgment. When Cromwell emerges from the Tower, he walks with dignity despite weeks of confinement. Like others you've seen make this final journey, he has composed himself to die well, the last control available to those who have lost everything else. On the scaffold, he speaks briefly, acknowledging his sins in general terms, while maintaining he served king and country faithfully. His voice carries clearly across the hushed crowd, finding your ears with painful directness. I die in the Catholic faith, not doubting in any article of my faith, nor doubting in any sacrament of the Church. The statement startles many listeners. Cromwell, architect of England's break with Rome, prosecutor of Catholic resistors, declaring Catholic faith at the end. Is this sincere conviction revealed only when nothing remains to lose, or a final political calculation to deprive enemies of complete victory? The executioner, drunk according to murmurs around you, makes a botched first stroke that fails to kill cleanly. Cromwell's body convulses in agony. A second, third, and finally fourth blows complete the gruesome task. The crowd, initially appreciative of his suffering, falls silent as the brutality extends beyond expected norms. You watch it all with outward impassiveness, same as you observed Anne Boleyn's more merciful end years earlier. But inside, something shifts, not conscience exactly, but perhaps its quieter cousin, awareness. Awareness that the machinery serving Henry's will consumes even its most dedicated operators. Awareness that no position, however exalted, provides security when royal favor turns. Awareness that the ground truly does shift beneath every courtier, clergyman, and commander who serves the Tudor king. After the execution, you perform required courtesies, acknowledging witnesses of similar rank, expressing appropriate support for royal justice served, before returning to your brother's residence. There, safely behind closed doors, you finally allow reaction to surface. He knew, you tell your brother, voice barely above whisper despite servants being dismissed. When he spoke to me at Hampton Court, he anticipated his fall, yet he continued serving, continued implementing policies he perhaps never truly believed in. Your brother nods slowly, as we all do to varying degrees. The price of proximity to Henry's throne. At what point does survival become? You search for the right word. Complicity. A question better left unexamined. Your brother advises pouring wine for both of you, at least aloud. You accept the cup, accepting too the wisdom of his caution. Even private dwellings have ears in Tudor England. Even brotherly conversations can become evidence of treasonable thought. Late that night, unable to sleep, you walk through your brother's small city garden. Above, stars pierce the London haze, indifferent to the day's bloody business on Tower Hill. In the distance, the tower itself stands dark against the night sky, its stones containing centuries of secrets. You think of Cromwell, his body now buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within those walls. You think of Anne Boleyn, of Lord Rochford, of the northern rebels, of countless others, whose lives ended under royal command. You think of your own narrow escape, your carefully reconstructed existence, your monthly reports on neighbors' religious practices. Complicity. You whisper to the unhearing stars. The word hangs in night air, neither accusation nor absolution, simply naming what survival requires in Henry's realm. Perhaps Cromwell understood this better than most, that moral compromise forms the foundation of Tudor service, that principled stands lead to shortened lives, that adaptability trumps conviction for those who wish to see another season change. You return to London periodically, over subsequent months, as Tudor history continues its bloody progression. Catherine Howard, the king's fifth wife, whose wandering glances you noticed at Hampton Court, follows Cromwell to the Tower and the axe, convicted of adultery with Thomas Culpeper and others. Religious policy shifts again, moving closer to traditional Catholic practice while maintaining royal supremacy. Those who implemented the previous, more reformed approach find themselves carefully withdrawing from court positions or facing dangerous accusations. Through these treacherous currents, you navigate with increasing skill, having absorbed the Tower's fundamental lesson: survival requires careful calculation rather than moral certainty. You sign what requires signing, attend what requires attendance, report what requires reporting, all while maintaining private reservations, invisible to official scrutiny. Years pass. The king marries a sixth time, to Catherine Parr, who somehow survives him, despite dangerous religious sympathies. Henry himself grows increasingly ill, his injured leg never healing properly, his massive body failing even as his suspicious mind remains acute. When death finally claims England's most formidable monarch in January 1547, the court holds collective breath, uncertain whether the succession will proceed smoothly or dissolve into factional conflict. Edward VI, Henry's 9-year-old son, ascends the throne with his uncle Edward Seymour as Lord Protector, establishing Protestant governance more radical than anything under Henry. New times bring new dangers and opportunities. Those who maintained quiet Catholic sympathies during Henry's later years now face increased pressure to conform to explicitly Protestant worship. Those who harbored Reformed beliefs now find court favor and advancement. You adapt again, as you have done since your Tower confinement years earlier. Your official compliance with Edwardian religious settlements remains impeccable, while your private practice incorporates elements of both traditions, a personal version of the middle way that characterized Henry's approach before factional extremes pulled him toward traditional or reformed positions. 5 years into Edward's reign, age and responsibility having added silver to your temples and lines to your face, an unexpected letter arrives, bearing the royal seal. Not a summons to court or command for military service, but a different kind of royal attention, permission to enter the Tower of London on personal business, related to matters of historical record and remembrance. The unusual request originated from your carefully phrased inquiry months earlier, suggesting that proper historical documentation of the Tower's significant prisoners might serve the Crown's interest in maintaining accurate records. The young king's scholarly tendencies made him receptive to such academic justification. In truth, your motivation runs deeper than historical documentation. Since your release 15 years earlier, the Tower has remained a presence in your dreams, a shadow occasionally falling across your waking thoughts. Something unfinished lingers there, not inside the stone walls themselves, but in your understanding of what those walls witnessed and contained. You travel to London with minimal retinue, preparing for this return journey with both anticipation and apprehension. The Tower you will enter by invitation bears little physical difference from the fortress that once confined you, but your relationship to it has transformed completely. On a clear September morning, you present your royal permission to the current lieutenant, a career soldier who served under the late king and now administers the tower with professional efficiency. He reads the document carefully, nods once, and assigns a senior guard to accompany your historical survey. You may access the permitted areas from sunrise to sunset, the lieutenant explains, his manner courteous but reserved. No interaction with current prisoners is allowed. No documents may be removed. Notes may be taken but must be reviewed before your departure. You agree to all conditions. Having expected such restrictions, the guard assigned to you, an older man named Richard Colby, who has served at the tower for over 20 years, studies your face with quiet assessment. "You've been here before," he says, as he leads you toward the inner ward. Not a question, but an observation. Yes, you acknowledge, seeing no reason to deny, what tower records would easily confirm. During the late Queen's troubles, I was released after questioning. Tudor nods, neither impressed nor judgmental. Many come through these gates, fewer leave through them. The simple truth of this statement resonates as you follow him into the tower complex. The familiar weight of stone surrounds you once more, not as oppressor now, but as witness, as keeper of secrets, both personal and political, both spoken and carried silently to the grave. Your historical survey begins, appropriately, at Traitor's Gate, where your tower journey once began. The water entrance stands quiet today. No barges delivering pale-faced prisoners, no guards waiting to escort the newly confined to their uncertain futures. It was originally called Watergate. Colby informs you, professional guide now rather than prison escort. The name changed during King Edward IV's time, after it became the primary entrance for those accused of treason. You nod, remembering the slow journey from Thames barge into the tower's stone mouth, the sound of water lapping against worn steps, the weight of dread that settled around your shoulders like a physical cloak. And how many have passed this way in your service here? You ask, genuinely curious about the tower's traffic during your absence. Colby considers before answering. Hundreds, my lord, some notable, most forgotten, except in tower records, all experiencing the same journey over these steps, though each believing their situation uniquely tragic. The observation carries no cruelty, simply the perspective of a man who has witnessed the pattern repeat countless times. The tower processes human fear and hope with institutional detachment, reducing individual drama to entries in a ledger. From Traitor's Gate, your survey continues through familiar territories. The Bell Tower, where you spent your first frightening week. The Beauchamp Tower, where you later found relative comfort. The Tower Green, where Anne Boleyn and others met their ends. Throughout, Colby provides professional commentary, neither emphasizing nor minimizing the darker aspects of the tower's function. You take notes, partly to maintain the scholarly pretense of your visit, partly to create a personal record of this return journey. At the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula, you pause longest. This simple stone building contains more Tudor political history than any cathedral or palace, the mortal remains of 2 queens, numerous nobles, ministers, and churchmen who fell from royal favor and climbed tower scaffolds. They lie beneath the chapel floor, Colby explains, his voice naturally lowering in the sacred space. No markers identify individual graves, all equal in death, regardless of rank in life. You think of Cromwell, his Catholic declaration on the scaffold, followed by unmarked burial in this Protestant chapel. You think of Anne Boleyn, once crowned and anointed in Westminster Abbey, now lying beneath plain stone, alongside those accused of being her lovers. Does anyone remember them individually now? You ask quietly. Beyond historical record, I mean. Does anyone still mourn specific losses? Colby considers the question with unexpected seriousness. The tower remembers, he says finally, not as humans remember, with emotion and detail, but in its own way, in worn steps that carried their feet, in walls that heard their prayers, in stones that absorbed their final breaths. The response strikes you as profound, despite its simplicity. The tower does remember, not through conscious memory, but through physical continuity, stone bearing silent witness to each human drama played out within its walls. Late afternoon finds you in the Beauchamp Tower, specifically requesting to see your former chambers. Colby leads you up familiar stairs, explaining that these rooms currently stand empty between official uses. We house prisoners of rank here still, he says, unlocking the door to what was once your world for several anxious weeks. French diplomats during last year's negotiations, a Spanish priest before that. The walls have heard many languages of fear and hope. The chamber appears smaller than you remember, its proportions diminished by comparison with the freedom you've enjoyed since release. The same window faces westward. The same worn floor bears the marks of countless anxious footsteps. The same walls display carvings left by previous occupants. May I have a few moments alone? You ask, surprising both Colby and yourself with the request. I wish to make accurate notes of the historical features. Colby hesitates, such privacy for visitors being against typical protocol, but something in your expression, perhaps the recognition of a man confronting personal history rather than merely documenting official record, sways him. 5 minutes, he concedes, stepping outside, but leaving the door ajar. I'll remain within hearing distance, as regulations require. Thank you, you say simply, genuinely grateful for this small liberty that would have seemed inconceivable during your confinement. Alone in the chamber that once defined your existence, you move slowly around its perimeter, fingers tracing familiar stones. The window embrasure where you stood watching executions on Tower Green, the spot near the door where your servant James first brought news of Cromwell's intervention on your behalf. This section of wall where previous prisoners carved their marks. You find the small ship you noticed during your confinement, a simple carving of a vessel with billowing sails, someone's dream of escape rendered in stone. Beside it, the word persevere remains barely visible, a whispered encouragement across decades. Without conscious decision, you remove a small knife from your belt, the scholarly tool brought for sharpening quills, not the weapon that would have been confiscated upon imprisonment. With careful, quiet strokes, you deepen the ship's outline, restoring definition to sails faded by time. Then, beneath the word persevere, you add a single additional word, remember. The act feels neither defiant nor sentimental, but necessary, acknowledgement of connection between your past and present selves, between your individual experience and the collective history contained within these walls. A private conversation with the tower itself. When Colby returns, after exactly 5 minutes, you stand calmly reviewing your written notes, the knife safely returned to its sheath. If he notices the freshened carving, he gives no indication, merely gesturing that it's time to continue your survey. The remainder of your tower visit passes quickly. Brief examinations of the White Tower's historical chambers, notes about the ravens that still patrol the grounds, observations about recent modifications to the fortress's defensive capabilities. As sunset approaches, you complete your official documentation and present your notes for the lieutenant's review as required. Nothing in them suggests anything beyond scholarly interest. Nothing indicates the deeper purpose of your return to this place of confinement and narrowly avoided death. Your survey appears thorough, the lieutenant comments, skimming your neat script. The young king will be pleased with such detailed historical accounting. The tower deserves accurate remembrance, you reply, the statement carrying personal meaning beyond its official context. Its stones hold much of England's story. He nods, returning your notes with formal approval. Indeed they do, my lord, and continue to accumulate more with each passing reign. You exit through the tower's main gate, as twilight settles over London, the same gate through which you departed 15 years earlier, walking towards uncertain freedom, while others remain behind facing certain death. Beyond the walls, the city buzzes with early evening activity, merchants closing shops, apprentices running errands, taverns filling with patrons, church bells calling the faithful to evening prayers, life continuing in its messy, vital persistence, indifferent to the dramas contained within the tower's stone embrace. Your journey back to your brother's city residence takes you along the Thames, where you pause briefly to look back at the fortress silhouetted against the darkening sky. From this distance, individual features blur into collective impression, a solid, unmovable presence that has witnessed centuries of human triumph and tragedy with equal impassivity. Yet not complete impassivity, you think, remembering Colby's words, the tower remembers, in worn steps that carried their feet, in walls that heard their prayers, in stones that absorbed their final breaths. In your chambers that evening, you complete a second set of notes, private observations not included in the official record. These speak of executions witnessed, of fears experienced, of compromises made for survival, of lessons carried forward into subsequent decades of Tudor service, of Anne Boleyn walking with dignity to her death, of Cromwell declaring unexpected faith on the scaffold, of your own transformation from confident courtier to cautious survivor. These notes will never reach the young king's scholarly attention. They speak truths too dangerous for official acknowledgement, too personal for public consumption. Instead, they will join other private records kept secure at your country estate, testimony preserved for some future generation that might better understand the cost of living through England's volatile transformation. Before sleeping, you stand at the window looking toward the tower, now visible only as a darker mass against night sky. 15 years since you left its confines, yet its presence remains within you, not as nightmare or trauma, but as knowledge, as awareness of how quickly certainty can dissolve, how thoroughly power can rewrite truth, how persistently stone outlasts flesh. The stone keeps your secret, you whisper to the darkness, not entirely certain what secret you mean. Perhaps the compromise required for survival, perhaps the fear that never fully leaves once experienced, perhaps the understanding that moral clarity rarely survives contact with absolute power, or perhaps the secret the tower keeps is simpler, that you, like Cromwell, like Anne Boleyn, like countless others who passed through Traitor's Gate, are ultimately reducible to brief mention in historical record, to worn impressions on stone steps, to carvings that future prisoners might notice and renew. That night, your dreams are not of execution or confinement, but of the small ship carved into Beauchamp Tower walls, sailing forward despite knowing no true escape exists, persevering despite understanding the journey's ultimate destination, remembering despite the human tendency toward convenient forgetting. In the morning you will return to court duties, to careful navigation of Edwardian Protestant reforms, to the ongoing work of survival in Tudor England. You will sign what requires signing, attend what requires attending, speak what requires speaking, all while maintaining private understanding, invisible to official scrutiny. But something has shifted during your tower visit, some reconciliation between your imprisoned past self and your surviving present identity. The weight you've carried since release, not quite guilt, not quite trauma, but something between them, has transformed into something else: responsibility. Responsibility to remember accurately rather than conveniently. Responsibility to acknowledge compromise without surrendering to cynicism. Responsibility to recognize how power shapes truth without abandoning belief in truth's ultimate value. As dawn breaks over London, you draft a letter to your son, now approaching the age you were when first summoned to the tower. The letter speaks not of courtly advancement or political strategy, but of deeper matters: conscience and compromise, fear and courage, remembrance and forgetfulness. The stone remembers what flesh forgets. You write in conclusion: in Tudor England, this truth may save your life, though perhaps not your soul. Navigate carefully between them. Remember those who couldn't or wouldn't make such navigation. Honor their courage without necessarily emulating their fate. You seal this letter with your family crest, not for immediate delivery, but for safekeeping among your private papers, to be read perhaps when your son faces his own moral compromises, his own negotiations between survival and principle. The tower has released you, physically years ago, and spiritually during yesterday's return. Its walls no longer confine your movements or define your fears, but its lessons remain, carved into memory like ships, and words into stone, persisting long after those who created them have departed. In Tudor England, where religious truth shifts with royal proclamation and political loyalty requires continuous recalibration, such lessons provide no absolute security. The ground always shifts eventually. As Cromwell warned before his own fall, the axe always arrives on time for someone, but the stone remains, witnessing, absorbing, remembering what human histories might conveniently forget or deliberately obscure. This is what you carry forward from your tower confinement and subsequent survival, not just practical lessons in Tudor political navigation, but deeper understanding of how power and memory intersect, how individual lives become compressed into historical footnotes, how personal truth survives within necessary compromise. As you prepare to leave London, returning to estates and responsibilities that have sustained your family through religious upheavals and political purges, you take one final evening walk along the Thames. The tower rises on the opposite bank, its stones catching the last golden light of sunset, windows reflecting fire that gradually fades to shadow. From this distance, individual details blur, no visible distinction between bell tower and Beauchamp, no separation between royal apartments and prisoner cells, no marking of execution grounds or burial sites, just stone upon stone, arranged in patterns that have endured while countless human dramas played out within their embrace. How quickly we fade, you murmur, watching darkness gradually swallow the ancient fortress. 500 years of history contained within those walls, yet how many individuals remain remembered by name? A handful of queens, a few statesmen, perhaps several especially notorious traitors. The rest, hundreds, perhaps thousands who entered through Traitor's Gate, reduced to anonymous entries in tower records, their fears and hopes dissolved into collective historical memory. And yet, paradoxically, something of each remains, in worn stones they touched, in windowsills where they waited, in carvings they left behind. The tower holds these fragments, not as conscious memory, but as physical imprint, as accumulated presence that transcends individual transience. This realization brings unexpected comfort as you turn away from the river, walking back toward your temporary London lodgings. Your time in the tower, both as prisoner and as returning visitor, has taught that while individual lives may fade quickly from active memory, they leave traces that endure beyond deliberate commemoration. Anne Boleyn's final dignity, Cromwell's last declaration of faith, your own small addition to the Beauchamp Tower carvings, all continue existing, not just in written records, subject to political revision, but in physical spaces that resist complete erasure. The stone keeps these secrets, not by conscious choice, but by simple persistence. Morning brings departure from London, your small traveling party joining the steady flow of traffic, leaving the city for countryside estates and provincial towns. As the tower disappears behind you, no longer visible through urban streets and riverside buildings, its physical presence recedes while its significance remains. You have survived what many did not, the machinery of Tudor justice, the suspicious scrutiny of a volatile king, the religious upheavals that sent others to scaffold and stake. You have rebuilt position and influence following confinement, adapted to changing requirements of conscience and compliance, maintained family prosperity through dangerous times. But survival brings responsibility to remember accurately, to acknowledge complexity, to recognize how easily principle dissolves when preservation becomes paramount. Your recent tower visit has reinforced this understanding, adding weight to knowledge carried since your release 15 years earlier. The journey home takes 3 days through autumn landscape, leaves turning gold and crimson along roadways, harvest activity filling fields with workers gathering what summer has produced. This cycle, growth, maturity, collection, dormancy, renewal, continues regardless of religious settlement or royal proclamation, indifferent to human disagreements over transubstantiation or papal authority. You find yourself watching ordinary people as you travel, farmers bringing in crops, millers grinding grain, villagers preparing for winter's approach. Their concerns remain immediate and practical: sufficient food, adequate shelter, basic security against illness and misfortune. The larger theological and political questions that drive court factions seem distant from these fundamental needs. Yet even these ordinary lives exist within the shadow of Tudor power, their parish churches modified to reflect reform practices, their priests now answering to king rather than pope, their traditional observances scrutinized for signs of outlawed Catholic devotion. The machinery that sent queens and ministers to the tower extends its influence into humble village life, reshaping ancient patterns to serve new authorities. Upon reaching your principal estate, you resume responsibilities temporarily delegated during your London journey. Reports from stewards, petitions from tenants, correspondence from county officials, all require attention, all fit within established patterns of rural governance, largely unchanged, despite religious and political transformations elsewhere. Here in your private study, surrounded by familiar objects and family portraits, the tower seems distant physically and emotionally. Yet its presence remains in how carefully you review religious practices mentioned in tenant reports, in how precisely you phrase correspondence with church authorities, in how thoroughly you separate private thought from public expression. One evening, several weeks after your return, as autumn deepens toward winter, you find yourself drawn to the estate chapel where generations of your family have worshipped. The small stone building, dating from the previous century, bears signs of recent modification: statues removed, wall paintings whitewashed, communion table replacing traditional altar, all reflecting Edwardian Protestant reforms, more radical than anything attempted under Henry. Alone in fading daylight, you sit in the front pew where your grandfather once knelt before a very different chapel arrangement. He lived and died within a unified Catholic England, his faith and his loyalty aligned without contradiction. His son, your father, witnessed the beginning of Henry's break with Rome, but died before being forced to choose definitively between religious conscience and political allegiance. You, however, have navigated the full transformation from traditional Catholic upbringing to required Protestant conformity, with the tower's stone walls marking the most dramatic point of transition between worlds. Your children know only this new religious landscape, their understanding of the old ways coming exclusively through stories and foreign connections, rather than direct experience, what remains beneath whitewash and reformation. You wonder aloud, your voice barely disturbing the chapel silence. How much of traditional faith continues invisibly, despite official suppression, like wall paintings, concealed but not destroyed by Protestant covering? How many outwardly conforming subjects harbor private reservations similar to your own? These questions find no immediate answer in the quiet chapel. Like the tower itself, this space has absorbed many prayers, witnessed many professions of faith, some sincere, others politically expedient. Its stones hold echoes of Latin masses, now forbidden, and English services now required, accumulating religious expression without judgment or preference. Rising from the pew, you move toward the chapel's small side chamber, where family members lie buried beneath floor slabs, engraved with names and dates. Your grandfather's stone includes prayers for his soul's journey through purgatory, Catholic language now considered heretical. Your father's memorial, created during the early years of religious reform, uses more ambiguous phrasing that might satisfy either traditional or reformed interpretation. Your own burial space waits empty beside them, the stone already positioned, though not yet engraved. What words will eventually mark your passage? What religious formula will balance personal conviction with political necessity? What will remain for future generations to read and interpret according to their own understanding? These considerations, mortality and memory, private belief and public representation, echo your recent tower reflections. The parallel seems both appropriate and unsettling. Both spaces, family chapel and royal fortress, contain histories partially visible and partially concealed, stories told through official record and through physical persistence. Winter arrives with unusual severity, snow covering the countryside by early December, travel becoming difficult between isolated communities. News from London arrives sporadically, reports of continuing Protestant reforms, periodic executions of Catholic resistors, ongoing tensions between religious factions vying for influence over the young king. During these cold months of relative isolation, you spend evenings reviewing personal records and correspondence accumulated over decades of Tudor service. This private archive, carefully stored in locked chests, accessible only to yourself, contains materials that might prove dangerous if discovered by zealous religious inspectors, letters from Catholic associates, notes on traditional observances maintained secretly on your estates, personal reflections on theological questions officially resolved by royal proclamation. Among these papers, you place your recent tower observations and the sealed letter written for your son, testimony preserved for some future time when such perspectives might be valued rather than condemned. These join similar documents created after your initial tower confinement, forming a hidden continuity of memory parallel to your public conformity. The stone keeps your secret, you had whispered after your tower visit. Now, arranging these private papers in their secure repository, you understand more fully what that secret entails, not just specific religious reservations or political accommodations, but the larger pattern of divided existence that Tudor governance has required. Outward conformity with inward reservation, public compliance with private continuity, official endorsement of policies simultaneously undermined through careful omission and selective enforcement. This divided consciousness, this ability to navigate between competing truths without surrendering either entirely, represents both compromise and resistance, both survival strategy and subtle subversion. Spring arrives eventually, snow melting to reveal dormant life resuming its cycle. The countryside reawakens, with lambing, planting, building repairs postponed during winter months. Your estates return to productive rhythms established over generations, adapting to seasonal requirements with practiced efficiency. A messenger arrives one April morning, bearing news both significant and unsurprising. Thomas Seymour, brother to the Lord Protector and uncle to the King, has been executed for treason after attempting to kidnap young Edward VI. The political details, factional rivalry between Seymour brothers, romantic entanglements involving the King's stepmother Catherine Parr, financial disputes concerning royal authority, matter less than the familiar pattern revealed. Another noble has climbed tower steps to meet the axe. Another name joins the long list of powerful men whose ambitions exceeded their caution. Another family experiences the sudden transition from influence to disgrace that Tudor politics delivers with predictable regularity. You receive this news with outward expressions appropriate to your position, formal regret at such necessity, proper support for legitimate authority, careful avoidance of any statement that might suggest sympathy for the condemned. Internally, however, you note how the machinery continues its operation, regardless of which particular faction currently controls its levers. The Tudors rule through periodic bloodletting, not random, but carefully targeted to remove specific threats, eliminate specific rivals, intimidate specific constituencies. The tower serves as holding chamber for this process, its stones temporarily containing those selected for removal before releasing them to scaffold or axe. You who entered those same gates, but departed alive, understand the calibration involved, how much fear to generate without creating unmanageable resistance, how many examples to make without depopulating the ruling class, how often to demonstrate royal power without revealing its fundamental insecurity. Summer brings news that the Lord Protector himself, Edward Seymour, who orchestrated his brother's execution months earlier, now faces factional challenge from the Duke of Northumberland. The perennial Tudor pattern repeats. Yesterday's executioner becomes tomorrow's victim, power constantly redistributed among surviving players. This endless cycle, rise, advantage, overreach, fall, has become almost predictable during your decades at court. You've witnessed 3 queens meet similar fates: Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, Lady Jane Grey, after Edward's death. Numerous ministers and nobles execute each other in sequence: Cromwell, Seymour brothers, Northumberland. Eventually, religious authorities burn or behead their predecessors and successors, depending on which doctrine currently dominates. Through it all, the tower stands impassive, receiving, containing, releasing to life or death, as directed, its stones accumulating stories, without apparent preference or judgment. Individual dramas play out within its walls, while its external appearance remains largely unchanged. Individual prisoners leave their brief marks, while its fundamental structure persists. You understand now, approaching the final decades of your life, that you are similarly both participant and observer in this Tudor pageant, actively navigating its dangerous currents, while simultaneously maintaining perspective on its larger patterns. Your tower experiences, both as prisoner and returning visitor, have positioned you at this intersection of engagement and detachment, of necessary compromise and preserved awareness. Autumn returns, marking a full year since your tower visit. The countryside prepares again for winter dormancy. Harvests gathered, animals culled, fuel stockpiled against coming cold. These practical rhythms continue regardless of court factions or religious settlements, their requirements indifferent to theological disputes or political rivalries. One evening, as early darkness falls outside your study windows, you add final observations to your private archive, reflections on patterns observed throughout your Tudor service, connections drawn between seemingly separate events, warnings and suggestions for future family members who might face similar challenges during coming reigns. The tower taught that survival often requires certain accommodations. You write in your careful script, but accommodation need not mean complete surrender. The space between conformity and resistance contains possibility for preserving what matters while relinquishing what does not. The stone keeps certain secrets, so flesh need not confess them aloud. These words, potentially treasonous if interpreted severely, merely philosophical if read generously, join others in your locked repository. Together they constitute a different kind of monument than the tower itself, not built from physical stone, but from accumulated observation and experience, not visible to casual inspection, but potentially more revealing to those who eventually access it. The candle burns low as you complete this work. Outside, beyond manor walls and carefully maintained grounds, England continues its uneasy progress through religious transformation and political consolidation. Ordinary people adapt their observances and opinions to match current requirements, finding spaces within official doctrine for private continuity, developing language that satisfies authorities while preserving personal meaning. This persistent adaptability, this capacity to bend without breaking, to accommodate without surrendering, to remember while appearing to forget, represents not merely Tudor survival strategy, but fundamental human resilience against absolutist demands of politics and dogma. The tower exemplifies this paradox physically, its massive walls simultaneously representing power's attempt at perfect control and the impossibility of achieving it. For despite the fortress's formidable presence, it has never contained human experience completely. Prayers whispered against stone are absorbed but not negated. Lives ended by royal command leave traces that outlast the commands themselves. Carvings made by desperate hands continue communicating long after those hands have decayed to dust. The stone that keeps your secret, you whisper again, extinguishing your candle as midnight approaches. The phrase has become something between prayer and reminder, acknowledgement of both vulnerability and persistence. In Tudor England, where religious truth shifts with royal declaration and political loyalty requires continuous recalibration, such understanding provides not perfect security, but essential perspective. The ground will always shift eventually. The axe will always arrive on time for someone, but the stone remains, witnessing, preserving, outlasting those who temporarily control its purpose. And in that persistence lies strange comfort for those caught within history's machinery, the knowledge that individual experiences, though quickly forgotten in official narratives, leave impressions that endure beyond deliberate commemoration or enforced forgetting. You rise, leaving your study for bedchambers where mortal concerns of aging body and approaching winter temporarily displace philosophical reflections. Tomorrow brings estate responsibilities, tenant issues, family matters requiring immediate attention rather than historical contemplation. But the tower remains present even in absence, its lessons incorporated into daily decisions, its perspective informing seemingly unrelated choices, its stones symbolically supporting structures built long after physical confinement ended. This is perhaps its most profound legacy, not the fear experienced within its walls, or even the narrow escape from its ultimate judgment, but the understanding that continues developing decades after release. Understanding of how power operates through spectacle and uncertainty, understanding of how memory persists, despite deliberate erasure, understanding of how individual lives simultaneously matter enormously and register almost nothing against history's vast continuity. As sleep approaches, your thoughts return briefly to the small ship, carved into Beauchamp Tower walls, its sails still billowing after countless years, its journey continuing long after its creator departed, its meaning available to anyone who might trace those lines with attentive fingers. Your own edition, Remember Place Beneath Perseveres, joins this silent conversation across time, connecting your experience to those before and after your brief tower residence. In this connection, this community of witness stretching across decades and centuries, lies meaning beyond individual survival or suffering. The tower's stones create shared context for otherwise isolated experiences, physical continuity for otherwise disconnected lives, persistent presence for otherwise ephemeral human dramas. The axe arrives on time for someone, always, but the stone remains for everyone, always. Between these twin certainties, death's punctuality and stone's permanence, each Tudor subject navigates as conscience and circumstance allow, finding what grace remains available within strictly limited choices. You have made your navigation, compromised where necessary, preserved what seemed essential, concealed what required protection. The tower's stones have kept your secrets, both those confessed during confinement and those realized only years afterward. In return, you have kept the tower's secret that its power, while physically absolute, remains spiritually limited by human capacity for interior preservation. This mutual keeping, this reciprocal containment, continues as your breathing slows towards sleep, as Tudor England continues its uneasy evolution beyond your windows, as the tower stands miles distant but ever present in memory and meaning. The stone remembers what flesh forgets. The flesh preserves what stone cannot contain. Between them, history accumulates, not as singular, authoritative narrative, but as layered impression, partial revelation, continued conversation between present urgency and persistent witness. In this ongoing dialogue between temporary inhabitant and eternal structure, between political expediency and physical endurance, between human fear and stern patience, something essential about Tudor England, about power's operation and resistance's persistence, reveals itself to those who survive to consider it. You have survived, you have survived, you have considered, and in doing so you have found not resolution but perspective, not answers but orientation within questions that exceed any individual life or reign. This, finally, is what the tower offers those who enter and leave its gates alive, not certainty, but context, not protection, but proportion, not escape, but understanding. Understanding that continues developing long after physical confinement ends, informing choices made decades later, shaping legacy transmitted to subsequent generations. Sleep arrives as these reflections dissolve into dreams, dreams not of scaffold and axe, but of stone walls absorbing whispered prayers, of small carved ships sailing across centuries, of moonlight falling on tower stones that hold memories flesh can no longer recall. The stone keeps your secret, and in that keeping something of you remains, beyond official record, beyond family remembrance, beyond individual significance, something that joins the accumulated human experience contained within those ancient walls, adding one more layer to the palimpsest of power and vulnerability, compliance and resistance, forgetting and remembrance that constitutes Tudor England's true history. As night deepens over your countryside estate, far from London's political intrigues and the Tower's silent vigilance, this understanding brings not perfect peace, but sufficient reconciliation between competing truths, enough to allow rest in a world where absolute certainty remains more dangerous than thoughtful ambiguity, where survival often requires certain accommodations, but accommodation need not mean complete surrender, where the space between conformity and resistance contains possibility for preserving what matters while relinquishing what does not. The Tower has taught its lesson well. The stone keeps certain secrets, so flesh need not confess them aloud. And in that space, between confession and concealment, between memory and forgetting, between power's demand and stone's endurance, you have found your particular place in Tudor England's complex tapestry, a place neither heroic nor craven, neither entirely compromised nor perfectly principled, but authentically human in its navigation between competing truths and obligations, a place marked briefly in tower stones through small carved additions, preserved more durably in private writings, secured against political discovery, transmitted ultimately through family teaching and example across generations. This legacy, not of perfect resistance or complete capitulation, but of thoughtful navigation through dangerous waters, may prove more valuable to your descendants than any material inheritance or political advantage. For Tudor England, with its religious upheavals and factional bloodletting, represents not historical aberration, but concentrated example of challenges that recur throughout human governance, challenges of conscience versus compliance, of individual integrity versus collective security, of temporary expediency versus eternal principle. The Tower stands as physical embodiment of these tensions, its stones simultaneously representing power's greatest assertion and its fundamental limitation. Those who enter and leave its gates alive carry this paradox forward, incorporating its lessons into subsequent decisions and perspectives. You have carried this paradox for 15 years since release, deepened your understanding through last year's return visit, incorporated its implications into private records and family counsel. The journey from initial fear through narrow escape to eventual comprehension has transformed your relationship with Tudor governance, not creating perfect security, which remains impossible, but establishing clearer orientation within continuing uncertainty. As sleep finally claims your conscious thoughts, the Tower remains present in memory and meaning, not as nightmare or trauma, but as reference point and perspective, not as simple lesson, but as complex testament to human experience under absolute yet ultimately limited power. The stone remembers what flesh forgets. The flesh preserves what stone cannot contain. And in this reciprocal relationship between temporary inhabitant and enduring structure, between political subject and historical witness, between individual vulnerability and collective persistence, Tudor England's essential truth reveals itself, that the axe always arrives on time for someone, but the stone always remains for everyone, keeping secrets, preserving impressions, offering context beyond official narrative or personal experience. In this balance between mortality and permanence, between power's exercise and its limitation, lies understanding available only to those who survive to consider it from sufficient distance. You have survived, you have considered, and in doing so, you have found not perfect answers, but essential perspective, a vantage point from which to observe Tudor England's continuing evolution, with neither complete detachment nor helpless immersion, but thoughtful participation, informed by Tower lessons, absorbed and incorporated over decades of subsequent experience. This perspective, neither exclusively internal nor external, but positioned at their intersection, represents perhaps the most valuable legacy of your Tower confinement and survival. Not merely practical lessons in political navigation, though these proved immediately useful, but deeper understanding of how history accumulates both through official record and through physical persistence, both through documented narrative and through embodied experience. The Tower holds both versions simultaneously, its official function as royal fortress and prison operating alongside its physical reality as container of human experience. Those who enter and leave its gates alive carry this dual awareness forward, seeing both official justification and actual impact, both proclaimed necessity and experienced consequence. Such vision, focused simultaneously on authorities' pronouncements and their practical effects, provides orientation without illusion, engagement without entrapment, survival without complete surrender. It acknowledges power's reality without granting it ultimate authority, recognizes vulnerability without accepting helplessness, confronts mortality without abandoning meaning. The stone keeps your secret, and in that keeping, something essential about Tudor England, about power and resistance, about conformity and integrity, about history's composition, through both deliberate record and physical persistence, reveals itself to those willing to consider it. You have considered, and in that consideration, found not resolution but orientation, enough to navigate remaining years with both practical effectiveness and maintained awareness, enough to transmit to subsequent generations both survival strategies and preserved perspective. The Tower has taught its lesson well. The stone remembers what flesh forgets, and somewhere between them, between permanent structure and temporary inhabitant, between official purpose and actual experience, between political necessity and human endurance, Tudor England's complex truth continues accumulating, available to those who survive to contemplate it.